Good morning, everyone. My name is Zachary Gott. I also go by Kaibon the Renegade on YouTube and TikTok. And today we're going to be reading my book, Godly Legacies, Lightning and Darkness. I know it's been nearly a year since the last audiobook came out, but this year I'm hoping to spend a little bit more time focusing on that. So here's this audiobook, and the next audiobook will probably be the rest of Godly, since I only have the first chapter of it available right now. But once that's finished and finalized, I expect that hopefully by around the same time next year, the book that's going to be coming out in the next month, or maybe it'll be out by the time this audiobook is finished, Godly Legacies, The Land of Frozen Hearts, will hopefully also be ready, and probably around this time next year. But I've had some family complications and some other things. Anyway, if you've seen my channel updates, you know what's going on. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. There are a couple of sections in here that are supposed to be narrated by a girl. You'll kind of understand when I'm pointing those out. It's supposed to be a back and forth between Damon Godly, the person who's actually narrating this book, and Videl Godly, the person who tends to narrate all the rest of them. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So here we go, Chapter 0, Godly, Fire and Ice. And again, I know it's a little bit weird that the Chapter 0 for this book is Fire and Ice, but I only have Chapter 1 of Godly out. I'm sorry about that. Those books are huge and intimidating, and I'm going to really put my nose to the grindstone and get them done, or at least get the first one done this year, so you guys will kind of be starting to be able to get up to speed on it. But anyway, Chapter 0, Godly, Fire and Ice. Damon Godly had thought himself a mostly ordinary boy until he was 14 years old. He grew up in Athens, Greece, learning, making friends, and living the life of a regular child with his best friend Jacob. That was until the city was attacked by chimeras controlled by Chaos, a primordial god who created monsters in order to obtain a body powerful enough to conquer entire pantheons. This attack led Damon to Mount Olympus, where he learned that he and Jacob were both demigods, and they were trained to wield their divine strength. After having been captured by Chaos and abused for his sick designs, Damon wanted to stop him from harming others, so he followed along with Jacob's plan. The idea was to travel the land in search of the other pantheons and bring as many powerful deities together as possible to deal with Chaos's chimera army, and hopefully find a god strong enough to defeat Chaos himself. Jacob was sent to the north, his estranged sister Junia was sent west, and Damon was sent to the east. Damon was specifically instructed to try and bring Ram of the Hindu pantheon and Sun Wukong of the Chinese pantheons to our aid, but by this point in the story, he had failed to obtain Ram's help or that of any god in the Hindu pantheon, and he was expelled from their land as a punishment. Desperate to secure the aid of Sun Wukong, Damon traveled north through the warring states of China as he sought out clues that would lead him to the Chinese pantheon. Traveling far east, he met the goddess Nuwa, who pointed him toward Sun's home of Mount Huaguo after he helped her save a school of sacred carp from a creature of the sea. Or so he tells me, anyway. Either way, I think I'll let him take over from here. Our story starts right now in Godly Legacies, Lightning and Darkness. So that would have been Videl narrating. Now we're going to move to Damon narrating the rest of the story. Chapter 1, Enemy of My Enemy. So, Videl tells me you want to hear about the time I saved the world, huh? Well, I was about 17 at the time, and I had been traveling the world on my own for about a year and 4 months. I remember I was starting to grow anxious because we were all planning on meeting up in about 8 months, but I hadn't secured the help of any groups of gods thus far. I was worried I might have to return home empty-handed. Still, I wasn't about to give up anytime soon. I've always been tenacious, but that was especially true in my younger days. I spent weeks on the road, sometimes going days without eating, drinking, or sleeping, simply so I could make better time. China was a huge country that seemed to be at war everywhere in the north, and since I'm divine, I didn't need food or rest to stay alive like a regular person, and thought it would be best to remain on guard. Besides, I'm not much of a cook, and no one would take what little money I had, since it was all Indian currency, not Chinese. It was just after dark when I wandered into a small village I couldn't read the name of and was looking for somewhere I could find something to eat and maybe find some work. But I could immediately feel that something was off. Still, I was starving and desperate. So when I wandered into what seemed like a tavern, I didn't really take any notice of the stares of the locals on my back. I had become somewhat accustomed to it, being a tall Greek man with long, straight black hair to my shoulders and ice-blue eyes. I sort of stood out. I believe at the time I was wearing my red traveling cloak, a pair of pants, and a ripped white cloth belt, but I can't remember anymore. I walked up to the bar and sat down, waiting silently as the barkeep finished serving a pair of men in battered military uniforms. While I was waiting, I looked around the bar and noticed everyone had their eyes on me, and each of them were wearing scale-like plated armor and rounded helms, but none of the uniforms were all the same. Most of them were in groupings. 3 or 4 red, 2 green, and a handful of yellow and more. I turned back to the barkeep and took a deep breath, centering myself. I noticed the room had gone quiet and looked up to him. The man who'd been talking to him wasn't speaking anymore and was just sitting there, staring at me. They both looked wild-eyed and jumpy. "Any work I can do to get a hot meal around here?" I asked carefully. Before he could answer, one of the men he'd been talking to wearing blue armor got up and approached, pulling out and pointing a crossbow at me. "Just leave everything you got and get the hell out of here, and we won't have to hurt you, kid." He seemed surprised when I smiled at him. I told him, "I ain't got nothing to leave. I just want an honest meal." The man pointed down at my hip. "You can leave that pretty little sword you got there," he replied. My sword was one forged by Hephaestus, a legendary blacksmith of the Greek pantheon who'd been slain some time ago. It was made of a strange black metal and only had one side edged, but I'd grown rather fond of it. He was surprised when I stood up, so I told him, "If you want my sword, you'll have to take it from me." He pointed his crossbow at me, but seemed surprised when I didn't back down. More men started standing up and loading crossbows as well. I put a hand to my blade and took a step back as the man pointed his crossbow at my head. "You draw that thing, and you're dead," he said flatly. I replied, "We'll see," and as if in response to my reply, the man reflexively fired his crossbow. I drew my blade and slashed the bolt clean out of the air before stepping up and putting the tip of the sword to his throat. He was shocked, but his allies weren't backing down, so I shouted, "If you morons try to fight me, I'll kill every last one of you," in the hopes that they weren't that stupid. Unfortunately, they were. Many of them fired their crossbows at me, but I was too fast for them to respond to as I flashed to each and every one of them, cutting them down more swiftly than their bolts flew. When I was done, the only one left alive in the tavern was the barkeep. The poor man was terrified as I approached him again. "Please don't kill me. I've got nothing to do with them. General Wong and those beasts took over our town and killed most of our men. Please, I'll give you whatever you want," he cried. "I just want something to eat," I explained. He nodded strongly and said, "Yes, sir," before running to a fire pit stovetop where a large pot of what seemed like stew was boiling. The man fetched me a bowl of the stew and some rice, and he even poured me a cup of tea. At first he seemed like he was going to wait patiently while I ate, but then he seemed to change his mind and ate with me. We didn't speak while we were eating, but something felt off about simply eating a meal while surrounded by corpses. When I was finished, I took the bodies behind the store for him. It was simple work and helped me refocus. After I finished, I approached the barkeep once more and asked, "So tell me about this general. He and his men rode into town nearly a month ago, and ever since then they've terrorized us and eaten us out of house and home. Barely any of our residents are still here. Most of us fled when we realized it was hopeless. But I've got a little son who's too sick to travel. I can't just leave him. And those bastards killed my wife," he explained as tears of fury fell from his eyes. The man clenched his fists and was too choked up to speak anymore. "Well, I can't bring your wife and friends back, but maybe I can clear those assholes out for you," I offered, trying to hold back my rage. "Please, just don't get yourself hurt. There's been too much bloodshed already," he begged. He seemed taken aback when I smiled softly and gave him a thumbs up. "Don't worry, I'll make sure they pay for what they've done." He didn't say anything as I got up, turned, and left his tavern. I was still exhausted, but at least I wasn't hungry or thirsty anymore. I walked down the street and found myself surprised to find nearly 100 soldiers all gathered around a gallows. 5 men had already been hung, and as I walked up, they were decapitating the last victim they'd had tied up. I couldn't help but grit my teeth at their barbarism. "And with this, the resistance has been defeated and this town is ours! Now we're ready to take the fight to the Mingsong family," one man shouted from the gallows. He seemed important. He was a puffed-up man with studded blue armor that depicted a Chinese dragon in gold, but he was short, rotund, and had a long black beard and mustache. After he shouted to them, the crowd of mismatched soldiers started raising their fists and chanting, "Long live Wong Fei Han! Long live Wong Fei Han!" But they went silent as I rushed onto the stage. "Hey, who the hell are you?" he asked me. At the time, Jacob hadn't chosen Godly as our family name as far as I knew, so I'd introduced myself as such. "I'm Damon of Athens. Are you General Wong?" The man seemed surprised, but nodded. "Well, it's nothing personal, but I've come to kill you and set this town free." General Wong threw his head back and laughed, but he didn't get out more than a chuckle before I took off his head. The fat old general went down with a single stroke of my blade, so I turned to his army as I flicked the blood from my sword. Nearly all the men drew crossbows and pointed them at me, making me sigh to myself. This again? Don't any of you fight with honor? I asked with exasperation. As if to answer my plea, one of the largest men stepped forward with a massive battle axe resting on his shoulder. He pointed the axe at me as the men cleared a path for him. "I'll fight you for the honor of General Wong," he growled. "All right then, but if I win, you and your men clear out of this town and leave their people alone," I demanded. The man nodded without hesitation and raised his axe, beckoning me to attack. I rushed him and kicked his axe handle as hard as I could, making the weapon lash back and bash directly into the man's throat. I was surprised when he skidded back but remained on his feet. He grunted in anguish before regaining his posture and rushing at me. I took a step back and flourished my blade as I waited for him, and as he swung his axe at me, I lopped the weapon's head off its hilt, making it drop down and into the dirt and go tumbling. I sidestepped the massive man as he stumbled, but when all the men saw his axe missing its head, a deadly quiet settled over the crowd. The man growled as he turned back to me, but he was completely aghast when I pointed to his ruined axe pole. "That axe could have been you. Accept your defeat." There was a scream of terror in the crowd, and the men scattered like insects, including the one who challenged me. I gathered my wits and scanned the crowd, watching for any particularly large groups among them. I spotted one and caught up to them in an instant, knocking over the most decorated soldier among them and pinning him under my foot. One of them cried, "What do you want?" with terror. I couldn't help but smirk at them before I said, "Tell me about this Mingsong family." A scrawny man in green armor stepped up with fright. He told me, "The Mingsong family are a father, daughter, and son who control practically the entire province. General Mingsong Lai and his children are in charge of the military forces in Ordos and has final say over the state's military. But his daughter is largely in charge of the southern half, and his son is in charge of the north." "Okay, but why do you all want to kill him?" I asked. "Because that bastard conquered our lands by force. We were going to kill him and break apart his tiny empire to restore our own lords to power," a man in yellow said. "Wait, so you're a rebellion?" I asked. A few of them nodded, and I scratched the back of my head. Whoops. "Still, you took over this town by force. How are you any better than the Mingsong family?" "We're fighting to reclaim our homes. Surely you can see the difference in that," the one in yellow said. "Maybe, but if you're killing others in their own homes, as far as I can tell, that makes you murdering bandits just the same," I said. Most of them gritted their teeth. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before glaring at each and every one of them. Then I let the man out from under my foot. He backed away through the dirt, and I told him, "Accept the Mingsong's rule. I've killed your general, and if any of you plan to try and hurt me or these townspeople again, your blood'll run through the streets with his." A few moments of silence passed as the men looked to one another, but all it took was for one to turn and run before the rest followed for fear of their lives. I sighed with relief, glad the ordeal was over. I found an empty, ransacked house and laid down on a bed in a near-empty room, but no matter how hard I tried, sleep eluded me. I think I was anxious about sleeping in that place, worried they would come back and catch me napping. I laid there for several hours begging for sleep, but when it didn't come, eventually I had to get up. I wasn't out on the road more than 3 hours before I made camp and took a long rest, and when I awoke it was sunset once more. I traveled all night, but by morning I reached a fairly large village of stone and brick buildings built into a hillside and surrounded by foliage. I couldn't read the sign out front, but by checking with the only local in sight I learned it was called Dongfu Village. The reds, golds, and purples of fall lined the leaves of nearly every tree and added brightness to the dusty town, but I arrived not long after dawn and many hadn't yet left their homes. The streets were nearly empty, and as I walked them, I felt a strange sense of dread as the near silence in the early morning was broken only by my quiet footsteps. I walked for several minutes before a pair of kids left their home and went running by with a puppy, so I asked them, "Hey, where is everyone?" "Hey, who are you, mister?" the smaller one asked in response. "Our mom says we're not allowed to talk to strangers. Come on, Kang Wen," the bigger girl said, grabbing her little brother by the arm and pulling him away quickly. I sighed and watched them run away, annoyed I hadn't learned anything. I searched the streets for at least 2 hours without seeing a soul, and it was beginning to make me suspicious. For it to be mid-morning with hardly anyone around was absurd. The silence was finally broken by the sound of a mismatched pitter-patter that could only be a running adult. With little more than my ears to go on, I ran toward the sound, desperate for any information. It wasn't more than a moment before I rounded a corner and accidentally crashed right into a man only a little shorter than me. We slammed into each other so hard it knocked me down and sent him tumbling through the dirt. I quickly got up and dusted myself off as I headed over to him. He was a bald Chinese man wearing a stained yellow robe and one sandal, and he seemed to have landed hard on his face. I bent down and offered him a hand. "Are you all right?" I asked, wanting to see if he would take my hand. He struggled with the pain a moment as he held his bloodied nose, but he took my hand and I helped him to his feet. As I helped him up, I couldn't help but notice his eyes. His irises were bright yellow, and it was like the pupils were shining blue stars. "Yeah, I think I'll be okay," he sniffled. He had tears in his eyes as he checked his nose, but it appeared unbroken despite the redness and blood. "I'm sorry about running into you. I'll have to try to be more careful." "That reminds me, what were you running from?" I asked. He looked to me and tilted his head. "Running from? No, sir. I was running toward my home. I've been away for quite some time, and I've returned to see my sister and help her with some problem she's been having," he explained. "Problem?" I asked reluctantly, not sure I should wrap myself up in this guy's issues. He replied with a shrug and said, "Dunno, she was pretty vague about it in her letter." I crossed my arms. "So I guess this means you don't know anything about what's going on here then, huh?" I asked with a sigh. "No, I've only just returned this morning." "Why? What's going on here?" he asked with confusion. "I don't know, but doesn't it seem strange that hardly anyone's around?" I asked in reply. He looked at me oddly a moment before he paused, but then he said, "You know, I did actually notice that. Old man Zhaoling Li wasn't at his shop this morning." He seemed pensive, so I decided to take my opportunity. "Would it be an inconvenience for me to come and speak to your sister with you? If she's going to tell you what's going on around here, we might as well save her some breath and let me hear it too." "You want to help, huh? Thank you very much," he replied, taking a deep bow of gratitude. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. "Yeah, all right. Let's get on with it," I said. Chapter 2. Sonnet of Mingsong. So this guy brings me to his house to meet his sister, and it's this little modest house on the north side of town, but we still didn't see anybody else on the way. We go inside, and the man immediately brings me out to their backyard where we meet his sister, seemingly playing with a flock of chickens and her chicks. She was a short Chinese woman with shiny chestnut brown hair tied in a braid that hung to her waist, and had bright blue eyes that sparkled like starlight. She was wearing a stylish red long-sleeve blouse and a tight black skirt that really showed off her curves. I couldn't help but picture her. Now, this right here is the first break. We've got a break here, and then it goes, "Uncle Damon, you promised," in a different font, because it's supposed to be Vidal talking to her uncle. So he goes, "I couldn't help but picture her. Uncle Damon, you promised." Right. Anyway, we walked up to her and her brother said, "Hey, Jew, it's good to see you again. Your letter confused me, but I came as quick as I could. Oh, right, this is... Wait, I forgot to ask you your name. I'm so sorry. Please forgive my rudeness," he begged. "It's all right. We did meet in a surprising way. I'm Damon of Athens." "It's nice to meet you, Damon of Athens. I'm Ching Zhao, and this is my sister Ju." "Ju, this is Damon. He seems to want to know more about what's going on in town," Zhao explained for me. "I think we'd all like to know. General Lai had his men come round up most of the able-bodied around here and forcibly drafted them into the military. Then he marched them off into the forest to the northeast," Ju said. "The forest? But the only thing of interest near that forest is Mount Huaguo. I've heard the Mingsong family controls everything in this province. Why would they bring so many forces there?" Zhao asked the room. "Mount Huaguo? That's where Nuwa said I would find Sun Wukong if he was at home," I said to myself. It seemed to pique their interest, but they both only seemed more confused. There were a few moments of uncomfortable silence before Ju spoke up, saying, "Even if Sun Wukong is there, why pull everyone from our town to fight a bunch of monkeys?" "I have no idea," Zhao said with disappointment and a shake of his head. "Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. You said the forest is to the northeast?" I asked Ju, pointing with my thumb. She nodded. I nodded in reply before turning and heading toward the fence. "Wait, let me come with you," Zhao begged as he ran up to me. I told him it probably won't be a very safe place. I don't want to see you get hurt, but he insisted, saying, "I can handle myself. You'll see." I rolled my eyes, sighed, and continued to the northeast without a word. He seemed to take my silence as an invitation and walked by my side. We climbed the hill surrounding the town before cresting it and heading back down, but on our way we managed to spot some tracks in the mud that seemed to belong to a large cart. I went and checked them out while we followed them down to the forest below. This seems like a surprisingly large cart to be wheeling out into a forest. You would think it would get stuck out in the trees and roughage, I said. Zhao nodded, but I was surprised when he pointed ahead. Look! It looks like the bushes have been cut down, he said, running ahead on the path of the tracks. I followed closely and immediately saw the small stumps of bushes left behind. Their trunks and foliage had been simply tossed aside just out of the way, but I was annoyed when I saw the tracks continue deeper. The army had cut their way through the underbrush, wiping out every plant in their path to make way for their oversized cart. I growled, "Treating the forest like this is stupid and careless." Zhao only nodded in agreement. We walked for what felt like 4 hours before finally starting to hear some noise other than the quiet song of nature. As we crested a small incline leading down, we finally spotted the large cart. It had 8 men in front of it. They were guarding the pair of horses drawing it, and there were a handful trailing behind. The cart was large and covered by a tarp, but something inside it was flailing so wildly the entire thing rocked on its axles. I was curious, but Zhao grabbed my arm and pulled me from the cart's path. All the men stared at me as they passed by with the cart, and I glared back, but I still wasn't sure what to make of it. I said, "Those men didn't seem to have a leader with them, and there were so few. There must still be a frontier camp somewhere." "That would make sense. If I were a gambling man, I'd wager either Mingsong Liu or Lin Yu are in charge of this operation." "I wonder if they'll let us speak with them," Zhao pondered. "You don't need anyone to let you speak with them. Just speak," I said, heading back onto the tracks and following them deeper. "Try doing that with General Lai and they'll take off your head," Zhao said with a gulp. "Not if you have something important to say," I retorted. Zhao seemed surprised and couldn't tell if he agreed. We walked in silence a few minutes before finally seeing a very large group of soldiers in the same blue armor as those guiding their cart. They were surrounding a large man and a larger woman, the two of whom were seemingly just talking with each other. The man was a tall, bulky, and stocky Chinese man with a clean-shaven face and black curly hair. He was wearing the pants of the armor the men were wearing, but like me, it seemed he'd elected to go without a shirt. He had hardened green eyes and wore a light blue armband on his right arm that bore the Mingsong family insignia. He had a large glaive slung over his back and looked pleased. The woman he was speaking with was even taller than I am now, but back then she towered over me. She was nearly 4 heads taller, and I wasn't exactly short when I was a young man. She had long, dark blue hair that hung down to her waist, brilliant purple eyes, and a scar that ran from the cheekbone on the right side of her face to just under her left eye. She was wearing a short, sleeveless, light gray robe-like dress with a thin black cloth that hung to her knees and kept her dress tight over her waist of the armored blue leggings underneath. She also had a long cloak-like shawl in a checkerboard pattern of light blue and white, with wide sleeves that hung to her elbows. And a long decorative sword hung from bulky hips so wide that she looked like she could crush a man's skull between her thighs. "Really, Uncle Damon?" "What? How can you expect me not to point that out?" Yeah, roll your eyes. Anyway, the most interesting part about her by far was that she was surrounded by a shining golden light. If you're familiar with the aura transformations of the gods, these aren't the same thing. Our auras are usually thin, precise layers of shining energy surrounding our bodies, allowing us to store and emit even more power. But hers was different. It didn't surround her entire body. It seemed like it was coming from her stomach or midriff, and its intensity seemed like it was constantly changing based around her mood. Even as we approached, the light was shining more dimly by the second, but it never faded. The light of her body illuminated the entire clearing, and made her and the other Mingsong she spoke with stand out in the crowd, the latter of whom cast gloomy shadows through the trees. I turned to Zhao and gave him a signal to remain quiet so I could listen as we moved closer, and he nodded in agreement. The man was speaking as we approached. "That's right. You've done a great job, Lin Yu. Why don't you head home for a rest for now? I'll stay here and finish our gathering operation," he said. She smiled down at him. "Thank you, Liu. I'm surprised Oxhead proved so easy to capture, but nonetheless, Father will be pleased. Are you sure you'll be all right if Who are you?" "State your business," Lin Yu demanded as she heard our footsteps and turned in our direction. Zhao froze, but I kept walking closer. "I'm Damon of Athens. Why have you taken all the able-bodied from Dongfu?" I answered. "We're on General Mingsong's orders, kid," Liu shouted. He was about to say more, but his sister stepped forward and signaled for him to stand down. "We're here gathering loofah sponge and monk's hood. What business do you have asking our duties?" "Liar!" Zhao shouted behind me, surprising me greatly. You might be gathering those plants, but that isn't your real objective. Tell us what's really going on here. Mingsong Liu turned to his men as his sister smirked before responding. Execute them, was his command. Just as Lin Yu turned back to insist that they stop, they fired a legion of crossbows as the order to yield left her lips. I slammed hard into Zhao to knock him over as I drew my blade and managed to slash all the bolts that endangered me from the air in 3 strokes. Or, well, I thought I had anyway, but I did get hit in the left shoulder. Luckily, it seems my body was durable enough that the impact of the piercing bolt wasn't forceful enough to enter my skin, and it bounced right off. Did you see that, Lin Yu? I did. Stand down, men. You said your name was Damon, right? She asked with a smile. You won't forget it, I said with excitement. Zhao was starting to get up, so I said, Stay down, out the side of my mouth. He took my advice with a thumbs up before crawling behind a tree. It's nice to meet you. I'm Mingsong Lin Yu, and this is my brother, Liu. Your friend is correct that we're gathering more than those ingredients, but I'd like to know how he knows our business, she said. As her glare turned to a stare, her shining light grew brighter and suddenly something changed. Divines assert an outward pressure on the atmosphere once they reach a certain level of strength, but this mortal woman, she was growing more interesting by the second. Suddenly I felt a downward pressure, like the sky itself was pressing down on me, trying to force me to my knees. Zhao popped his head out from behind the tree, and as her eyes left me, I felt the pressure leave me as well. He pointed to his starlight eyes and called out, I have eyes that can see the truth! You can't lie or hide anything from me. Lin Yu and Liu looked to each other, seeming they hadn't expected that. After only a moment, Lin Yu turned to her men and pointed to Zhao. Capture him! Right now! She ordered. I put myself between them and pointed my sword at the men as they rushed us. Any who approach are welcoming their death, I shouted in fair warning. The men froze in place, but many of them had been reloading as they charged. They fired a volley of bolts at me, and I deflected most of them, but this time I was still hit by several. I froze when I heard Zhao cry out in agony behind me. I looked back and my heart began to sink as I saw him standing near the tree, doubled over and holding both hands over his left eye. I could see the bolt sticking out from between his fingers where it had struck his eye socket. I turned back to face our enemies as I heard a set of footsteps approaching. My heart started to race as I felt Lin Yu's unusual pressure once again pressing down on me. I took a defensive stance as she drew her blade and her light grew bright with intensity. If you're challenging anyone here to a death match, my code of honor compels me to accept, she said smugly before throwing a signal to her men to stand down. I gulped as I built up as much strength as I could muster, but I have to admit, I was intimidated. My master had trained me to fight opponents far more powerful than myself, and yet for some reason, this mortal woman was scaring the life out of me. I gritted my teeth and prepared myself for the worst as she stopped and flourished her exceptionally long black blade. I was a little surprised when she beckoned me to attack. She seemed entirely off guard, simply holding her long blade off to the side. I decided to try and use the element of surprise and lunged at her as fast as I could, but I was shocked when she perfectly parried my blow at the last second. I dropped into a sweep kick in front of her, but she merely hopped over it before landing right on top of me, pressing her foot down into my throat. I gagged as I started to struggle, but she pointed her blade at my neck. You move from your place and I'll kill you like the dog that you are. I growled and used my elemental power to call a bolt of lightning down from the sky. It crashed through the tree canopy and was supposed to electrify us both, but I couldn't believe she got out of the way in time. A wild but intrigued look in her eyes. I got up and rubbed my throat before flourishing my blade and electrifying. You might think you've got the upper hand, but don't you ever count me out until the fight is over, I shouted. She smiled and beckoned me to attack again. I smiled back and shook my head. She shrugged and rushed me. She was so fast it was like she disappeared and then reappeared in front of me. I barely managed to deflect her first slash, but as she spun into an even harder one, I was absolutely aghast when her sword snapped mine in two, slashing me across the face in the process. I went spinning into the dirt, but managed to right myself and start getting up quickly. She seemed entirely unsurprised and pointed her blade at my throat as I got up. This battle was over before it began. Any last words, Damon of Athens? Get the hell out of here, Zhao! I screamed, desperate to protect him from the Mingsong family. I didn't look away from Lin Yu, but I heard him gasp before running off in exasperation. Mingsong Liu threw a hand forward and shouted, "Fire!" before a volley of bolts left the men's crossbows once again. I put myself between the bolts and Zhao as much as I could, but I turned back and looked as I heard Zhao cry out again. He'd been struck in the knee this time, making him fall into the dirt with a groan of agony. "Damn it," I said to myself, looking back to Lin Yu as the broken sword shook in my grasp. She looked extremely satisfied, smiling smugly down at me as her purple eyes pierced my soul. It reminded me of someone. I couldn't help but back away as she started approaching, but she vanished. My eyes darted in every direction as I scanned the environment for her, but I froze when I felt her breath on my neck. I leaped forward to try and escape her attack, but I underestimated the length of her blade. If I hadn't ducked my head, she would have taken it off. Instead, she slashed me badly across the front and side of my head, cutting off a ton of my hair and getting blood in my eyes. "I hope you've made your peace," Lin Yu said, surprising me when she sounded a little sad. I was on the ground with my back to a tree as I desperately tried to wipe the blood from my eyes when I felt the tip of her blade touch my throat. But everyone froze when we all heard something strange approaching. Chapter 3. Monkey Business. I couldn't see anything, but I felt confusion in the air as everyone stopped and started looking around. We could hear something unidentifiable, and it was growing louder. A few moments passed before the lull was broken by the screech of a monkey. Everyone jumped with surprise as monkeys wielding weapons descended from the trees like falling stars, screeching as they fell but righting themselves and landing with grace. I heard a particularly large monkey land close by, and I finally managed to open my eyes and see again. "You people and your men need to leave. You're not welcome in our forest," the large one said. She was probably about a half a meter shorter than me and stood fully upright with a very human build. She was wielding a simple wooden bow staff and wore a somewhat fancy red silken garb that had thin white lines running through the top and evoked images of snow and was decorated with flowers, along with a pair of dull yellow pants, no shoes, and a silken red cap. The monkeys with her wore much more sparse clothing or armor pieces. "Yeah, like a bunch of monkeys are really gonna stop us," Liu said with a chuckle. The monkey girl turned to him and pointed her staff. She asked, "Are you in charge here?" And he nodded in response. "Prepare yourself!" she shouted, and he took up a defensive stance as he pulled out his glaive. The girl launched herself at him before batting his glaive aside with her staff and landing a devastating kick to his face, sending him crashing through the dirt until he slammed into a tree and smashed through it, sliding to a stop in the grass. Lin Yu took her attention off me and approached before she said, "I like you, monkey girl. What's your name?" She put her hands on her hips and smiled brightly. "I'm Sun Shenzhen Ren, the one and only daughter of Sun Wukong," she introduced proudly. Lin Yu seemed intrigued. "Interesting. First a Greek and now a Chinese demigod. Today has been quite eventful," she said. You know I'm a demigod?" I asked. Ren seemed like she hadn't recognized what Lin Yu had been saying because her mouth dropped open in surprise at my question. Lin Yu looked back at me and said, "I am the last blade of Mingsong. I know more about your kind than you probably ever will." I got up and electrified what was left of my blade, hoping Ren and her monkey army might help me turn the tables. I glanced back at Zhao to see him slowly dragging himself away before putting my full attention on Lin Yu. One of the soldiers fired at one of the monkeys and suddenly the entire battlefield was in chaos, but it felt like the only ones standing on it were Lin Yu, Ren, and I. Ren took up a defensive stance as Lin Yu moved with purpose. I could feel her intent to kill as she slashed at Ren's throat so quickly she didn't even seem to see it coming. I moved to intervene, but was absolutely aghast when I heard the clang of metal striking stone. It was as if he appeared out of nowhere. Standing there, defending Ren, was a much larger monkey man, wielding a stone cudgel and wearing only a pair of red pants, a golden belt, and red-pointed shoes. His fur was spiky on top, and he had a fuzzy beard that added a point to his chin. He had a glowing red aura surrounding him. It was thin, bright, and outlined his entire body in brilliant red that matched his eyes, making the edges of his brown fur slightly pink. He blocked Lin Yu's strike effortlessly as his burning red eyes stared furiously into hers. "Didn't you hear her? You aren't welcome here," the monkey man said sternly. Lin Yu seemed like she was about to respond, but before she could, he punched her so hard in the face that she crashed through 3 trees before bouncing to a violent stop in the dirt. The men saw their leaders were down and routed, leaving them to their fate. Sun just stood there, staring at Lin Yu in the dirt with intensity in his eyes. She scrambled to get to her feet as her light grew brighter, and I was surprised by her brother's speed as he ran entirely around the battlefield to join her side. "Are you all right, Lin Yu?" "I'll be fine. That one there in the center. He's Sun Wukong, she replied. Her blade was trembling, and I saw true hatred in her eyes as her brother looked to him in surprise. Sun adjusted his posture, putting his back straight and leaning his head back slightly as he relaxed, closed his eyes, and lowered his staff. I was surprised by the juxtaposition in his demeanor when he opened his eyes and pointed at her. I'm glad you remember me, but know this, Mingsong Lin Yu. I know who you are too. And if you want to remain the last blade of Mingsong, you'll keep your filthy troops out of our forest. The goal of your family is not what you think it is. Your father's ambitions will bring death and disaster to our entire country, so if you know what's good for you, you'll never show your face around here again, Sun threatened. Ruin? To our whole country? Really? Ren asked under her breath, making most of the monkeys start to question it as well. Everyone was surprised when Lin Yu didn't respond. Everyone except Sun, anyway. What are you waiting for? Are you going to leave, or have you chosen this place as your grave? He asked furiously. Lin Yu started to step forward, but Liu grabbed her elbow. Let's retreat for now. The first part of our mission was a success. Besides, Father will want to hear the news, he pleaded. She seemed upset, but decided to listen to her brother, sheathing her blade. She pointed a finger at Sun and said, This isn't over. Not by a long shot. And with that, she and her brother left on foot, simply walking away. I expected as much, Sun replied with his nose crinkled by his anger. With a flick of his wrist, he shrunk his cudgel down to the size of a needle and tucked it behind his ear, putting his hands on his hips and staring after them, a disapproving, angry expression on his face. Dad, we can't really just let them get away, can we? Ren asked, taking his attention. Young lady, I told you to stay out of this, Sun said, shouting at his daughter. She started to argue, but he cut her off. Ren, get back home this instant. It's too dangerous for you to be out here, he insisted. Ren tried to argue, but he pointed in the direction of their home and said, March! Reluctantly, she decided to heed her father's wishes. Just as she started off, a large group of monkeys came from elsewhere in the forest. Some monkeys were carrying dizzy, disoriented soldiers over their shoulders, and they were leading groups of people. The civilians were literally chained together. They had shackles on their wrists, necks, and ankles, with chains that tied around their waists and connected to the person behind them. And they were all wearing normal and largely undamaged attire. Some wore work clothes, some in more comfortable clothing. But a handful of them looked ill. They were holding their stomachs and had pained looks in their eyes. One vomited violently, causing the whole chain to stop and squirm in disgust and discomfort. Son, we found these townsfolk not far away. Some of them are sick. We think they've been poisoned, one monkey said, carrying a wicker basket. Just from looking inside, I could already tell, but I reached inside and pulled one out to examine it anyway. Monkshood, I said, gently turning the plant between my fingers. The monkey tried to snatch it from me, but I held it too high for him to reach. If you know what that is, then you know just how dangerous it is to hold it, the monkey protested. That's enough, you. He can't be poisoned by it, Sun explained for me. After a moment, I returned the plant to its basket before wiping my hands through the dirt to make sure I didn't leave any traces of the monkshood on them. After dusting off my hands, I said, They're gathering monkshood, so that means two things. Number one is they have someone they intend to poison. That's right. But what's number two? Few asked with a curious curl of his tail. It means these people they're using. They intended to let them die to gather it for them, I explained. Few went wide-eyed with shock. I don't know if that makes them cunning or evil, Sun grimly remarked. Sounds like both to me, I replied. Sun nodded as he looked down to me, but then he seemed struck before he offered a quick bow. Thanks for your help back there. I'm Sun Wukong. Nice to meet you, he said with a cheeky grin. I returned his bow and gave him a wave as I introduced myself. You too. My name's Damon of Athens. I've been looking for you for quite a while, but it seems you've been kept plenty busy, I said. Sun pointed to his own chest with a surprised look when I told him I'd been seeking him out. Looking for me? Oh no, not another one looking for those dragon's treasures again. Listen, kid, those books didn't tell you the real story. Pigsy made most of it up. There aren't any treasures that can grant wishes, okay? Sun insisted. I wasn't really sure what he was talking about. I don't know about any of that. I'm here because my pantheon needs help from the Chinese gods, I explained. Sun seemed both greatly surprised and intrigued. He put a hand on his chin, and I was suddenly very aware of his intense focus as his eyes scanned me up and down. You need help, huh? With what exactly? It's pretty rare for any pantheon to ask for help, he said. We're trying to gather an army of the gods to fight chaos and stop him from creating chimeras and desecrating the Egyptian tombs, I explained. Sun actually looked very surprised, but then his surprise was replaced by intrigue. Really? Now that's someone I'd love to have a crack at. When are we planning for this skirmish? It's set to take place near the next summer solstice, I said. Sun pumped a fist. Really? All right. You can count me in, Sun said with enthusiasm. Just like that? I asked. He seemed baffled at my question, but it was clear he simply didn't understand. I decided to run with it and offered a deep bow of appreciation. Thank you very much, but if I could ask a favor, could you help me get in touch with the rest of your pantheon so I could ask for their help as well? I asked, unbending from my honorable bow. He seemed a bit dumbstruck, but when I peeked up at him, he was smiling down at me. I pulled up from my bow as he put his hand on my head and ruffled my hair. It was annoying, so I tried batting his arm away, but he was so fast I couldn't even touch him. Ha ha! I like you, Damon. Tell you what, come with us and help these villagers get back home safely, and then I'll take you up to heaven so you can ask the Jade Emperor and the others for help. But I think I'll just bring you up to the gates. They don't like me very much up there. Sun chuckled, scratching the back of his head. I nodded to him and said, That sounds fine. Thank you very much. Without skipping a beat, Sun changed gears. Everyone, let's grab a human and run them along to the village. Smaller monkeys stay behind and keep the guards who aren't sick in line. Damon, let's carry as many as we can, he ordered. I sheathed what was left of my sword and prepared myself for some exercise. Right, I agreed. But before I could actually grab any, Sun moved like a streak of light and gathered up somewhere around 70 of the 100 or so villagers and took off toward town like a rocket. I decided to follow suit and grabbed up all the rest before dashing off after him. I couldn't believe the monkeys could keep up with me, because I sure couldn't keep up with Sun. It took me about 5 minutes to clear the forest, crest the hill, and make my way down into town. It was easy to find Sun and the others with all the commotion. He was giving out instructions and had already begun an effort to make the sick comfortable and start a head count. I had to admit I respected it. Sun directed me on where to set down the ill folk I was carrying before returning to Few, the aged monkey who spoke before. Few, take over and help the people figure out how to solve this. As for the rest of you, wait for Few's instruction, but we need to return to the forest and protect the entrance. Let's step lively now, Sun said with a wave of his arm. The monkeys moved into action like perfectly trained soldiers, lining up and allowing Few to give orders before following the direction of Sun himself. Few pulled a handful, but then he bid the rest of them farewell. The monkeys dashed up the hill before disappearing from sight completely. Sun turned to me with his hands on his hips. He asked, Ready, young man? With a cheeky grin. I nodded, and before I could do or say anything else, Sun grabbed me by the arm and started hoisting me up into the air. Chapter 4. Havoc or Help. Yellow clouds seemed to pour from Sun's shoes as he skated us up into the sky, dragging me through the air by the wayside. I watched the ground as we ascended through the clouds, slowly getting farther away as the buildings became indistinguishable from the landscape. It was only a few moments before I spotted something odd. Above the forest seemed to be a swirling mass of black clouds like a hurricane, but I was surprised when I noticed that it was actually getting bigger, growing even as everything around it looked smaller from the distance we were ascending. I was about to point it out to Sun, but we passed through the field of clouds before landing atop them. My head swiveled in awe as I took in the landscape of the heavens. In front of us was a massive, decadent, ornate palace with an entrance hall that stretched for ages, but every direction held unparalleled beauty. To the left I could see a grove of peach trees behind a gate. To the right was a stable filled to the brim with heavenly horses of varying colors, breeds, and sizes, and behind us was a large, closed gateway. I looked to Sun and he pointed forward into the entrance hall. The Jade Emperor's the old fart on a big throne. You'll see him at the end of the hall with his advisors. I would go in with you, but I don't want to hurt your chances of actually getting some help, he said, before casually resting his arms behind his head. I said, All right then, I'll be back soon, and headed inside. The massive entrance hall had marble floors with intricate patterns on them and huge stone pillars running along both sides of the main path. In front of each pillar stood what I assumed to be men wearing all sorts of different military uniforms. I say I assume because while some had quite normal faces, others had faces that resembled demons or animals, and each carried with them a polearm-type weapon. After walking for what felt like ages, I finally saw a few specks on the horizon in the center of the path. It took me a good few minutes to get to them, but as I approached I started hearing a commotion. In the center of the path was the one I assumed to be the Jade Emperor. He was huge and had focused blue eyes, a thin mustache, and a black beard so narrow it could be confused for a needle. He wore eloquent white robes embroidered with green and gold patterns, and he was sitting on a golden throne as a large man with a bright red face and beastly fangs spoke to him urgently. The man was wearing a blue uniform and rubbed his hands together anxiously as he spoke, but I didn't get to hear what he was saying because, without warning, a tiny man flew in on a yellow cloud from somewhere off to the left. He had a huge white beard and his eyebrows were so shaggy I couldn't see his eyes, along with a simple gray robe and a pointed blue hat. He flew in, landed beside the Jade Emperor in a panic, and quickly started telling him of the news. "My lord! My lord! We have an emergency!" he cried. The red man stopped speaking and the Jade Emperor looked to the old man. "The Mingsong family! They've really done it this time! They've ventured into DU, hell, and awoke Light Eater Towdy! What are we going to do? If we don't act now, the entire world will be plunged into darkness!" The Jade Emperor didn't respond. Instead, he looked to the old man with grave seriousness and deep grimness in the lines of his face. "Light Eater what now?" I asked when I heard silence on the air. "Towdy, one of the 4 great omens. If all 4 are awoken, an untold apocalypse will darken the sun," he explained. "Darken the sun," I repeated back, starting to understand the severity of the situation. Before it could fully sink in, the large red man the Jade Emperor had been speaking with prior stepped up to me with hands on his hips and a sneering look of disgust. "Just who are you, anyway? Who sent you?" he started to say. But we were all taken aback when the Jade Emperor himself reached out and grabbed him by the shoulder. The moment his gentle hand touched him, the man looked back with great surprise before getting out of his way and kneeling before him without a word. "Young one, return Towdy to his prison in Diu, and the Chinese pantheon will lend you our aid," he said. His voice was calm and somber, yet hopeful and pure, and his words rang true in my spirit. I could feel his good intentions radiating off of him so strongly I didn't bother to question his reading of my thoughts. I knew he'd done it for a good reason. I nodded to him and smiled softly. I waited a moment to see if he would speak once more, but when he didn't, I turned and marched out of Heaven's entrance hall. When I returned to the cloudy courtyard, I was dumbstruck to find Sun had left me behind. I poked around for him, but I couldn't find him anywhere. Annoyed, I said to myself, "Just great. And I don't know how to get down from—" "Ah!" I screamed as I started to fall through the clouds. I spun head over heels as I plummeted down through the sky, trying to think of a way to right myself. Then I remembered Jacob had used strategic bursts of fire to maneuver through the air during the Tournament of Champions. I could only control fire a little bit because I hadn't practiced with it in so long, but I managed to make a burst of flame in my hands and stop spinning. Then I really saw it. The dark clouds that had risen over the forest had grown more numerous and stayed just as heavy throughout. They were already covering Dongfu Village and other places in the surrounding area. It was only a moment or two before I passed through them and fell to the ground. The landing was rough on my knees and sent a ringing sensation from my feet all the way through my body. I stood up straight and took in my surroundings, having landed on the forested road I came into town on. It was dark here. So dark it was like the sun had already been darkened, and all that remained was eternal night. My eyes took a minute or two to adjust, but my senses were elevated by the change in environment. After I gathered myself, I headed into the village to see what was going on. The people had gathered in the town square, having set up torches, candles, and lanterns to provide them some relief from the overwhelming shadows. The darkness in this place was so crushing that the light simply couldn't travel very far, meaning the bleeding light we're used to seemed like it could never exist here, while it existed in small pockets of seeable distance, looking as though they were mere fireflies to anyone close enough to see them. As I approached the square, the very small amount of noise I had been hearing stopped suddenly, all except a child crying. Even that sound was nearly muffled in the overwhelming dark. The monkeys were gone. When I asked the citizens what happened, they told me the monkeys were spooked by the encroaching dark and fled back to their forest. I also asked if anyone had seen the Mingsong family skip town, and in what direction they went, but all I found out was that their horses were no longer stabled nearby. I had them lead me to their wounded, and there I found Zhao completely unconscious. He had wrappings over his eye and his knee, but it seemed he would recover all right. Apparently the bolt had missed his kneecap by a few centimeters, so the only surgery he'd needed was for his eye. There were only a handful of others wounded, but there were still several there complaining of stomach aches and numbness. Then I returned to Ju's house and explained what happened. She immediately headed out to check on her brother. With a sigh, I joined her, and we waited patiently together. We waited nearly 2 hours for him to wake up, but eventually the doctor told us that he could be out for days from the shock. I was tired and hungry, but as I looked around the sick ward, I found many people of the area gathered and helping the wounded. There was a familiar little girl crying about her lost puppy, but no one dared to go look for it. Eventually I had my fill of trying to sleep and headed out into the forest. The oppressive dark was still bearing down, but my eyes adjusted quickly enough. I returned to the site of my first engagement with the Mingsong family, but it was impossible to follow the tracks their cart left without any light. I gathered up some dry tinder and wrapped it around a sturdy, recently dead log I found on the ground before setting it ablaze with elementalism. It made a fairly useful torch once the tinder burned away, and I used it to follow the tracks the cart left behind. Deep into the forest then led me to a fairly large cave in the base of a cliffside. As soon as I entered, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The cave narrowed inside for a while before it opened up and led me to a great underground city. Unfortunately, just as I entered, I walked right into a nearly invisible barrier. I took a step back and pushed against it with my hands, surprised I was unable to go any further. A barrier, huh? Those Mingsongs must have found a way to pass through it, I said to myself. Actually, no one alive can go through, a familiar voice said from behind me. I turned back to find that monkey girl Ren standing there with a hand on her hip. But then, how did they, I asked myself as I returned to examining the near-invisible barrier. No clue, she said with a shrug. So then, what are you doing here? I asked. I could ask you the same thing, she said, crossing her arms. Oh, so that's it. You were following me. Ren nodded and gave a cheeky, uh-huh, in affirmation. I couldn't help but smile as I turned back to her. Jacob and I snuck out a lot too, so I wasn't going to bother asking her about that. But something about her reminded me of myself. So you're a demigod too, right? Do you know anything about those Mingsongs or what they came here for? I asked. She shook her head before she asked, That's what I was hoping to ask you about, with disappointment in her eyes as she kicked up some dirt in the other direction. I hear your dad's pretty strong. Why not leave it to him? I asked. Ren pursed her lips and puffed out her cheeks as she looked away. I waited a moment to see if she would answer, but when she didn't, I held up my fist and said, Listen, if you're strong enough to be of use, then I could use some help dealing with this touty thing. But if you don't have the nerve to back it up, then you should probably listen to your father. She seemed dumbfounded, and even more so when I started heading straight past her out of the cave. She called, Hey, wait! And started running after me, but I didn't wait up. She caught up to me after a few moments and asked, You really want to fight a creature like Touty? I don't really have any choice, I explained. But there's no way you can win. Besides, it's supposed to be imprisoned here in Diu, Ren said. It's been set free by the Mingsong family. I'm not sure if they meant to from what they were talking about before, but I don't really care. The creature they unleashed is a far more pressing matter. You sound pretty confident. What makes you think you can handle it? She asked. Nothing. That's what makes it so exciting, I replied with a smile. No wonder my dad likes you. Anyway, what do you plan to do now? Ren asked. Do you know where the Mingsong family lives? I imagine they're going to report back home to their father after what they said earlier, I conjectured. Ren shook her head. No. My dad might, but I'm not sure if asking him is the best idea, she said with shyness I hadn't expected. So I asked, why not? And she replied, because he'll just tell me to go back home again. She pouted and furrowed her brow as she crossed her arms in frustration. Yeah, but what if I ask? I queried. I imagine the same thing, only he might actually help you, or he might tell you to bug off. I sighed and said, real helpful, as we exited the mouth of the cave. I stopped for a moment and looked around. Ren, do all the spirits of this region use Diu as their path to the afterlife? Ren put a hand to her chin as she thought about it a moment. I think so. Why? She asked in reply. Because we haven't even seen one spirit. Surely someone or something has died in the last 5 minutes or so that we've been here. So why haven't we seen any? I asked. She seemed absolutely baffled by my question before looking deeply into the cave and then at our surroundings. I don't know. I didn't even notice that. What does that mean? She asked, seeming confused. I'm not sure, but I really don't like it. Come on, I've got to go get someone, I said. Ren nodded, and then she and I walked through the darkened forest towards Dongfu in silence for about 5 minutes before I thought of something. I realized the only way to get my answer was to ask her, so I asked, By the way, how did you find me? Can you sense energy like some divines back home? Yes, sort of. I followed your chi. It's kind of like life energy, but not quite the same thing, she said, seeming a bit nervous about her answer. What's different about it? I asked in reply. I don't know. My dad told me a little about it, but not much. All I know is they're different somehow, she said. She was about to say something else when I covered her mouth because I heard a massive footstep crunch through a log nearby. She looked like she heard it too and didn't make another sound. I heard another great crunching step a little closer this time, but Ren and I both had our heads turning about in panic, trying to find its source. Then I heard a tiny frightened yelp as a little black puppy ran through some bushes, its feet flailing wildly to propel it forward. Ren reached down and snatched the little guy up and started trying to gently calm him, but he yelped harder as another stomping crunch approached. From the darkness, a pair of bright yellow eyes emerged. It stood nearly 2 stories tall, and its black body was like seeing liquid ink against the darkness. But I could still see it was shaped like a massive, bulky horse with a pair of curled horns on its head and a red mane that glowed faintly like the foggy light of a soul. It had a stone mask that covered most of its eyes on the top part of its head, but you could still faintly see the burning yellow pupils smoldering underneath. Ren started backing away with wide eyes as her breath grew unsteady, and that puppy was struggling, barking, and practically shrieking with terror. I drew my blade and held my ground. So, you must be Towdy, I said, unsure if it would speak to me. I was surprised when the horse-like mouth seemed to curl up into a smile and it nodded at me, as if it was answering my question. What are you doing? We have to get out of here, Ren cried with fright. You go. I'll be fine, I said, hoping I would be right. Before Ren could respond, Towdy crouched down low and gave a whinnying roar. Its eyes flashed bright pink, and with it came unyielding, literally blinding darkness. I couldn't see a hand in front of my face, but my hearing grew muffled as the puppy's cries grew distant and indistinct. The darkness was so overwhelming I couldn't even feel the movement of the air. I felt like it was strangling me and grabbed at my throat, but there was nothing there to remove from my windpipe. In an instant, suddenly I was assaulted by my worst memories. My dad kicking the crap out of Jacob and I multiple times. My dad killing my cat when I was 7. The hole. Anemone accidentally pushing me off the pier when I was 12. Jacob's father's death when I was 14. And a whole slew of accidents from Enyo's training. I counted myself lucky the memories faded before I reached the incident with Junia and Chaos. Suddenly it all became clear again, and I gasped with relief, as if the hand of darkness itself had released me. I regained my vision just in time to see Sun land on his feet where Towdy had been just a moment before, holding a fist outstretched like he'd just delivered a blow. He continued looking around for a moment before turning back to Ren and I. It looks like he's gone for now. You've either got a lot of guts or a death wish, young man, Sun lectured, trying to take on a legendary creature with a broken sword. And as for you, young lady, where are you supposed to be right now? Ren's head drooped and she kicked up dirt bashfully. At home. That's right! Now turn right around and get marching. It's Damon, right? Why don't you come with me for a bit? You look starved half to death. Sun chuckled. Chapter 5. Breeze Through the Trees. Sun led us to Mount Huaguo, where we found a huge waterfall pouring from a river atop the mountain. With a simple gesture, the waterfall parted like curtains and revealed a large cave that seemed like it had been carved into to make it wider and deeper. Inside, it was like a palace made of stone, with enough housing and amenities to accommodate an entire kingdom of monkeys. First, he led us to a fancy dining hall where we all ate our fill. And man, I was grateful for that. But then he brought us to Few. As soon as he saw him, Few bowed deeply to Sun. I found it a little odd that none of the other monkeys did that, but without a word of greeting, Sun said, Please give me an update on the antidote. Yes, my lord. There's been a problem in the alchemy lab. Ping is asking for you to come see him immediately, Few explained. Sun seemed displeased. Without a word, he got up and started walking through the halls of the palace. Few kept pace without acknowledgement while Ren and I tagged along behind them. Few, could you please fetch Damon a suitable weapon, he asked, gesturing to me. I showed him my broken blade and he took it before leaving. That was the last time I ever saw that sword. But it wasn't 5 minutes of walking before he came up with a new one. It was a little longer than the last and had sharpened edges on both sides of the blade, but it felt well balanced. I flourished it and gave it a few practice swings, hoping it wouldn't break on me like the last one did. With a single swift motion, I sheathed it and looped it into my sword belt. Seem good enough? Sun asked. It'll do for now, at least, I replied. He nodded and was about to speak, but was caught off guard when I said, Sun, Ren said you knew about sensing chi and energy. I know you're busy right now, but it's almost impossible to see in the darkness out there, and I think I'd be more helpful if I could sense energy too. Sun seemed quite surprised at my indirect question. You want to learn to feel chi? You're right, that would be helpful, but most people take years to learn a skill like that, he replied. I smiled and pointed a thumb to my chest. Then it's a good thing I'm not most people. Sun seemed like he saw something in that moment. Maybe something in me, or something in himself. Part of me thinks he was reminded of himself when he was younger, now that I know him so well. But I guess I'll never really be sure. He looked at me with recognition in his eyes for a few moments before he put on a determined, almost furious expression, and his eyes grew redder and brighter. All right, then we'll learn on the go, he said strongly. Phew, I'm leaving you in charge of the palace. We'll get the antidote and deliver it to Dongfu. I'll let you know the situation when I know more. And Ren, if I find you sneaking out again, you'll be in huge trouble, so don't try it. It's too dangerous out there right now between Towdy and the Mingsong family. Few nodded in approval, and Ren seemed dejected and annoyed. Few parted with us, and only a moment went by before Ren spoke up. Wait! We found this puppy near Dongfu. Don't you think we should bring the little guy home? Sun sighed in frustration, but seemed surprised when I stepped closer and grabbed the little snot by the scruff of his neck, before taking him in my arms. Ren looked into my eyes with wonder, but I turned away. With that, we left Ren behind as he led me through the palace. He lectured me as we walked. I'm going to just assume you don't know anything about chi, okay? Chi is the flow of energy that travels through all things. It's like if everything in the universe were a wind chime, chi would be the wind. It comes from life itself and doesn't require the use of your own energy at all. It's always around us and in an unlimited supply. All you have to do is teach yourself to feel and manipulate it. And how do I do that? I asked impatiently. I'm getting to that. Normally, we teach the monkeys to feel the chi of the universe in our waterfall, since you can feel the heavy flow of nature as water comes raging down on you. But we're short of time, and the waterfall can't exactly come with us, he explained. I was waiting for him to finish, but was surprised when he led me to one of the many doors in the labyrinthian structure of the underground palace. He led us inside, where I was aghast to find a large alchemy lab, complete with gardens, a large space for experiments, and a good handful of monkey scientists. Sun walked right up to the one I assumed to be Ping, an old light brown fellow with a curly tail and a pair of spectacles balanced on his nose, and asked him, Is the antidote finished? We were both surprised when Ping solemnly shook his head. There is no antidote, son. We've tried everything we can think of, but nothing seems to neutralize the poison, he sadly explained. What? But I thought, Sun started to say, but he stopped when I interrupted him. I'm pretty sure he's right. The only thing I know of to deal with monk's hood poisoning is to treat the symptoms and prevent the patient from dying, but I'm not exactly a traveling doctor, I jumped in. Sun furrowed his brow as his frown stretched into a dissatisfied grimace. I watched his fist clench up a moment before he relaxed and regained focus. Then I guess there's nothing more we can do. Those damn Mingsongs. How many people are they going to slaughter before they're satisfied? He asked the room. No one answered. Sun clenched his whole arm a moment as I saw his lip lift in a furious snarl. Well, that's it then. I've had enough, he said. A moment later he relaxed his body and expression, but I could still see the rage boiling underneath. What are you going to do? Ping asked with unease I hadn't expected. I think I'm going to pay them a visit, Sun said, and without another word he started walking away. I immediately kept pace with him and we left the lab. I followed him in silence as we left the palace at a quick march. As we headed out into the overwhelming darkness once again, I noticed the puppy had fallen asleep in my arm. Something about the gentle rising and falling of its breath gave me a feeling of calm. Damon, I'd nearly forgotten about your training, but this is a pretty golden opportunity. Since we're almost completely in the dark here in the forest, try and follow the wind as it blows between the trees. It'll help you see the direction the universe is flowing right now, Sun tutored. I was a bit flabbergasted. Follow the wind? I guess I could give it a try, I said, completely unsure of myself. Master Enyo had taught me to feel and read the subtleties of the environment, and I could feel the wind at my back, pushing me forward. It was making my hair flow ahead of me on the breeze as it wafted past the rushing waterfall. Although it was dark, I still found myself looking around, trying to spot the specific direction it was leading me. I looked to him when I heard Sun chuckle. Close your eyes, he said. As if an example, he closed his as well. So, despite my reluctance, I closed my eyes. I felt Sun's body shift and the dirt move around his feet before he leaped away from me, and then I heard him call, "Trust it!" back at me. I settled myself and leaped forward, trying to follow where I'd heard his voice going. Unfortunately, I smashed headfirst into a thick branch and went spinning into the dirt. I startled and dropped the poor puppy, but I scooped the little guy up before he could take off on me. I rubbed my throbbing head, but still gritted my teeth and tried to follow the wind. It just felt like it was going straight forward, so I leaped ahead, crashing the whole front of my body into a tree trunk. This time I fell back first onto the ground and the puppy scrambled away with a frightened yelp. I was surprised when I heard a gentle footstep close by, so I looked up to see Sun scooping the puppy up with an apologetic look on his face. "Wow, okay, maybe this method isn't the right one for you," he remarked, scratching his cheek. I wasn't going to take that lying down, so I got up. "No, I'll keep going," I insisted. He seemed surprised, so I smirked at him. I took a moment to gather myself and try and feel the direction of the wind again. It was going forward, but now I could actually feel more. It was like it was trying to maneuver around the trunk and branches, dodging them as if they were blows. I decided to follow my instincts and leaped through some branches to my left. I made it through a layer, but immediately caught my foot on a branch and flipped face first into the dirt. "Are you sure you don't want to try a different method?" Sun asked. So I replied, "Maybe I should," as I plucked myself from the earth. Sun nodded strongly before plucking a hair from his head and holding it up. With a quick flash of blue light, it turned into a bouquet of flowers he then handed to me. "Asters? What am I supposed to do with these?" "Take a whiff. They smell great, don't they?" he asked, taking a good sniff himself. I took a fair sniff, but I couldn't hardly smell anything. "I can't really smell it," I explained. Sun seemed surprised, but changed gears, plucking a few of the many petals from one stem and crushing them in his hand. "Can you smell this?" he asked, holding them out to me. I took a deep inhale and my senses were warmed by an earthy scent that reminded me of pine, but lighter and less potent. "Yeah, it smells nice," I remarked, not entirely sure why he was so focused on scent. Good, good. This is how we teach monkeys who struggle to sense the flow of chi. Simply crush a few petals and release them into the wind. If you can follow their scent, it should lead you down a safe path. Most of the time," he remarked with a chuckle. "Now come on, I want to get to those Mingsong bastards before they can do any more damage." And with that he leaped off into the forest, taking the puppy with him. I gulped hard but followed his example, crushing a few petals from the asters and letting the wind carry them away. I followed them closely and was actually able to leap to safety twice, but on the third bound the petals were caught in the hollow of a tree. Luckily I managed to land on the trunk before righting myself as I fell back to the ground. "Not bad, but stop using only your eyes. Follow them with your nose, too," Sun insisted. I nodded and crushed another few petals before casting them to the wind. It took me several more tries, but eventually I started to get it. Once I was making progress, Sun stopped me. "This is good. If you manage to follow them with each of your senses individually, you should eventually be able to put them all together to sense the flow of chi in the universe. It will probably take more practice than we have time for, and I'd like to get a move on. Hopefully the basics are enough for you to get by for now." "I think I'll figure it out, thanks," I said. Sun simply nodded to me. "So now what? Are we ready to drop in on the Mingsong family?" I asked with a smile. Sun surprised me when he raised a finger. "Actually, I was going to ask you to return this little guy to Dongfu. I'll head to Ordos and see what I can make of the situation," Sun said, offering me the pup. "Not a chance in hell. I've got a score to settle with that Mingsong woman. Damon, I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you, but she's even a threat to me. I'm fairly certain she would pick you apart," Sun said cautiously. "Not if I could use an aura transformation like you can," I said. "And can you?" "Well, no. But you could teach me," I said with a pump of my fist. I was feeling excited at the prospect of finally catching up to Jacob after all this time. Sun couldn't help but smile a bemused smirk at me. "What do you think I am, your new teacher? I have other things to do today, you know," Sun retorted. "You really can't show me?" I asked. "I mean, I could try, but it's not something that people usually pick up in a day or two. In fact, it's rare for any demigod to reach the level of power required to use an aura transformation. And aside from that, usually it's tied to something specific in your mind, and I'm not exactly much of a therapist," he replied with a shrug. "Damn, then how am I ever gonna catch up?" I asked myself, looking to my clenched fist. Catch up to whom?" Sun asked. "My best friend, Jacob. He managed to transform and get a bright golden aura, but he says he doesn't really understand how he did it," I explained. "Really? And this Jacob is also a demigod of the Greek pantheon?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, this whole plan to gather help from the other pantheons was his idea in the first place," I said. "You don't say? Oh, what the hell.
I'll try, but no promises, Sun said. I pumped a fist and said yes to myself, and he looked me up and down. I'm not really sure where to start. This is a lot easier when you know the person well. Oh, I've got it. Damon, take this puppy back to Dongfu, then return to my palace. There you can have Ren lead you to speak with my mother-in-law. She'll read your mind and be able to give you a lot more help on the subject than I ever will. In the meantime, I'll head to Ordos and see what I can see. Sound good? He asked. I felt pretty conflicted. I wanted to speak with Sun's mother-in-law and learn how to unleash my full potential, but at the same time, I assumed that Sun would probably be able to defeat Lin Yu and deal with the situation without me. But I really wanted to fight her, just one more time. I think I'd rather fight now and learn later, I said. Sun seemed a little annoyed as he grimaced and cleared his throat. Really? Well, do you know where Ordos is? He asked. He smiled when I shook my head. Great! Dongfu is that way. See you when I get back, he said, pointing in the direction of Dongfu before heading off so quickly it was like he vanished completely. The silhouette of his cheerful wave lingering in the air a moment after he was gone. Cheeky asshole. Chapter 6. A Duel in the Dark. I returned to Dongfu as quickly as I could manage in the darkness and decided to take advantage of the time traveling to train. I used the asters and followed them through the trees, and it saved me quite a bit of time that I would have otherwise wasted walking. I actually got good enough that I tried to stop using the pedals, but I still found myself struggling without the scent to follow. By the time I was ready and doing it without them again, I had reached the village. The town was even more quiet than I had expected, but the puppy seemed excited to be home again. I walked through the streets and peered into windows, surprised that nearly none had light coming through. There were still almost no people walking the dusty streets, but that was to be expected in the overwhelming darkness. I checked Ju's house and found the place deserted. With a sigh, I returned to the doctor's office where I'd seen that crying kid, but both the puppy's owner and Zhao were gone. In fact, the large infirmary was practically empty. I headed to the back and was struck with unease by the dead silence, so I cupped a hand to my mouth before calling, "Hello? Is anyone there?" An old man pulled himself from a nearby closet, causing various medical items to be scattered across the floor as he jerked free. He put a finger to his lips and shushed me before dusting himself off and coming closer. He had long white hair tied in a ponytail and a beard that was narrow and hung to his knees. He wore a simple red robe-like garb and sandals. As he approached, his eyes lingered on the puppy before he looked me over as well. "Are you all right, young man? How can I be of help?" he asked quietly. "Well, I'm looking for the owner of this puppy, and also this guy named Zhao. You would probably remember him. He has special eyes," I recalled, pointing to my own eyes. "Special eyes? Yes, I remember saving a man's eye today," he said, his weary eyes drooping slightly. "I checked his sister's house, but no one was there, so I was wondering if you might know where they went. I can't help but feel like it's my fault he got shot in the first place," I discontentedly expressed. "What kind of game are you playing at, mister? I know I'm old, but I'm not that foolish," he sneered. I was a bit taken aback, not really sure what he was on about. "I think you might be confused. I don't mean to cause any harm." "So then, are you not with those Mingsong tyrants?" he asked. I was surprised, but shook my head. "No, I'm trying to stop them from hurting the people of this town," I explained. He seemed a bit dumbfounded and scratched the back of his head. "Oh, I apologize. When I saw you without a shirt on, it reminded me of that bulky moron who barged into my office," he said, seeming annoyed by the reminder. "Well then, to answer your earlier question, most of my patients who were awake and able to walk were taken to the forest by the Mingsongs once again." I was shocked to say the least and about to act, but I gave pause when he continued. "It really makes me sick. Most of those who made it back were deathly ill when they returned," he added as he bent down to pick up one of the many items off the floor. I rushed forward and picked up all his stuff as quick as I could before piling them up on his table and sprinting out the door without a goodbye. I blasted up the hill and dashed into the forest as quick as I could, and this time I was able to find my way through the trees without much trouble, though I did trip once or twice. The wind was blowing against me as I headed through the forest, and although I couldn't feel or describe chi, I could now feel the complete path of the wind, not just its direction. By leaping through the branches as Sun did, I was able to make great time through the trees and came up to the entrance of Diu in what felt like only a few minutes. The cave was surrounded by men in blue armor, and the entrance was blocked by Mingsong Liu, the bulky brother of my real target. I was surprised I hadn't seen the card of Lin Yu, but I figured they must have been inside Diu. There was some slight commotion nearby. One of the soldiers was poking a sick man with his spear, trying to rouse him to keep working. The soldier poked him hard just before the man violently vomited, while those chained together with him could only watch helplessly. "Hey, get up, you lazy bum. I don't care if you're sick. You're stopping the others from working. Get off your knees, you," he started to say, but he didn't get to finish his sentence before I'd had enough. I leaped down from the tree branch I'd been perched on and drop-kicked him so hard he didn't get up. I spit on the arrogant bastard before breaking the chains that held the prisoners together. "Hey, Damon, over here!" Zhao called from somewhere to my right. I heard him, but unfortunately so did Liu and the others. I immediately turned to those that I freed. I instructed them to hide yourselves, and they all moved as quick as they could to get out of the way. Liu was walking toward me with a big ugly grin on his face, so I bolted to Zhao. He had his damaged eye covered with bandages and a leather eye patch, and I immediately handed him the puppy. "Keep your head down this time," I told him seriously, and Zhao only nodded. "I was hoping I'd get to see you again. That monkey girl won't save you this time," Liu said. "I don't need any help," I told him snidely. "Besides, I'm more interested in your sister than I'll ever be in someone as weak as you." "We'll see how tough you talk when I present your head to Lin Yu," he retorted, drawing his glaive. I put a hand on my blade and took a defensive stance. Liu ran off to my right and vanished. I wasn't sure if he was simply that fast or if the darkness was giving him the cover he needed, but I was totally on guard. He came in hot on my left and swung his glaive from my lower right. I sidestepped it and drew my blade with a violent slash, but he managed to leap right over it. He pushed himself off a tree trunk in a bounding jump before vanishing a second time. I said, "He's fast for someone so large," to myself as I lowered my blade. Then I took a deep breath to settle down. I only barely heard his running footsteps rush up from behind, so I jumped into the air to dodge his attack, landing on a high branch. "You'll have to try harder, big guy." He smiled up at me and said, "All right, just don't forget that you asked for it," before pulling out a small black orb that sparkled like starlight. It flashed brightly, so I shielded my eyes. But before I realized what was happening, my senses began to fail me one by one. I couldn't see a hand in front of my face. My ears heard only a muffled hum of nothingness. My fingers went numb, and I couldn't smell anything at all. "So this is how a guy like you beats those who outmatch you?" "Pitiful," I said, trying to mentally prepare myself for whatever Liu had planned for me in this state. I grabbed the hilt of my blade in both hands tightly, but I was taken completely off guard by a vicious blow to the back of my neck that sent me crashing down to the ground. I managed to get up quickly, but as I turned back to face Liu, he knocked my blade right out of my hands. He didn't immediately attack, so I imagine he was saying something coy, but I couldn't hear him. I decided to take advantage of the opportunity and fired a powerful bolt of lightning straight ahead. I have no idea what I hit, but it wasn't Liu, because he immediately slashed me violently across the chest with his glaive. I was knocked back into what I imagine was a group of people who broke my fall, but something sturdy smacked me right in the face. I grabbed at it and felt a fine wooden handle, and by the weight, balance, and handle shape alone, I determined it was a shovel. I pushed myself back to my feet and prepared myself for a desperate play, shovel in hand. But then, standing there on the battlefield with people behind me, blood pouring from my open wound and an imperceptible enemy before me, suddenly, I felt it. The wind, the smells, my vision, my hearing, all of them were gone. But instead of it feeling like I was missing something, it was like they'd been taken out of my way. My senses couldn't confuse me anymore. I could feel the flow of chi moving across the battlefield, pushing Liu and I against one another. It told me where he was going to go. I held up my shovel and blocked as he dashed up on my right. I couldn't hear him, but I could feel his body recoil in shock after the shovel blocked his glaive. He was caught completely off guard when I drew back and smashed him in the face with the shovel, sending him tumbling through the dirt. To my surprise, his spell wore off as he lost focus and my vision and other senses returned to me as he bounced across the ground. As my senses suddenly came back to me, I gasped from the sudden shock and needed to catch my breath. I took a moment to check my chest and found it bloody, but the wound had nearly closed up completely. Liu was completely aghast, and it seemed my blow had smashed in part of his cheek. He got up slowly with a hand held to his face. But when he returned his attention to me, I saw unyielding rage in his eyes. I smiled at him as we locked eyes, and he grunted with rage, pushing himself to his feet. We were about to engage in another round, but just as we started to move, there was a blood-curdling cry of terror from off to my right, not far into the darkness. Both our heads immediately turned toward the horrified scream, but then we looked back toward each other. I couldn't focus on him anymore, and when I looked into his eyes, I could tell Liu felt the same. We nodded to each other and immediately ran off toward the sound together. I was surprised by how effectively the bulky man managed navigating the trees in the darkness and at such high speeds. It seemed like it didn't bother him in the least. When we got close to the sound, we were both given pause by a disgusting crunching sound. I heard a man screaming as he fled from something and managed to intercept him. I grabbed him by the shirt, but as I looked at his face, I was struck. The man's face seemed as though it was literally melting away. You could see parts of his upper and lower jaw sticking out from the disgusting, oozing flesh, along with a part of his right eye socket. He was also missing large patches of his black hair, and had a tuft of it sticking out between the collar of his gray robe and the back of his neck. "Hey, what are you, what happened to you?" I asked with complete shock. "Let go! You don't understand! That thing's come to eat me!" he pleaded. Before I could question him further, Towdy's bulky form smashed through a pair of trees in a running approach. All I could think to do was dodge, so I held on to the man and got out of the way, but the beast turned back and charged me again. "What's that thing's problem?" I asked, dodging again. Liu seemed to be listening and put himself between us and the apparition. "Please, you have to help me get out of here," the man begged. I shoved him behind me. "Then get going." "I'll try to hold him off," I told him. He seemed beyond grateful and started running off through the woods. I prepared my shovel before realizing I'd left my sword behind. Towdy didn't seem interested in us at all, though, dashing past us into the forest to chase after the man. Liu and I both leaped at the monster, but our strikes passed right through it. We dashed after Towdy, but we didn't have far to go before we found the beast. Having pinned the man, we tried to protect the ground under its hoof. With a sickening crunch, Towdy literally bit through the man's head, left arm, and torso, revealing a burning gray light as his blood soaked the grass. With another snippy bite, Towdy snapped up the soul of the man and devoured it, leaving nothing but a bleeding husk underfoot. "So that's why they call you Light Eater," I remarked, preparing myself. Towdy smirked viciously at me. "Who cares? We've got to stop this thing here and now. For the good of us all," Liu shouted as he launched himself at the creature. He spun his glaive into a violent slash at Towdy, but I was surprised when the beast's eyes glowed orange and Liu stopped in midair. A faint orange glow wafted from Liu's body as he hovered above the ground, and his body twitched uncomfortably. Liu dropped his weapon and was immediately hurled backwards, crashing through trees and landing in a heap in a bush. He wasn't getting up. I gritted my teeth and electrified my shovel, but I gave pause when I saw the smirk droop from Towdy's horsey lips. Without warning, it was like Towdy shifted from a solid to a gas, its black beastly form drifting away like mist on the breeze. I realized that it was running and lunged at what remained forward, missing the shifty gas with my blow entirely as it blew away on the wind. Frustrated, I raised my fist and shook it in the direction the beast disappeared to, shouting, "Hey! You can't just run away every time I get close to you!" Of course, the beast didn't respond, so I called, "Coward!" into the trees, hoping to get it to return to the battlefield to spite me. But it didn't. So I asked myself, damn, how the hell am I going to return that thing to the underworld when I can't even lay a hand on it? Unfortunately, I wasn't struck with an answer, so I returned my attention to Liu. He was still completely unconscious, but I found myself in luck. The bulky fool had been carrying a sturdy rope on his hip, so I used it to bind his hands and feet together. Once I was sure he wouldn't be escaping, I carried his chunky ass back toward where I'd found Zhao. Zhao was chained to his sister and a couple other people, but everyone around was surprised to see me return carrying Liu. The soldiers of the Mingsong army backed down and didn't bother trying to fight. I dropped Liu to the ground and immediately broke Zhao and the others free before giving an order to the soldiers to set all the civilians free. I found myself grateful when they obeyed. Zhao immediately got my attention with a pat on my shoulder. "Hey, Damon, I'm glad you're all right. Here, I grabbed this for you," he said. I was surprised when he handed me my sword. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Thanks." But he waved me off, saying, "Hey, it's no problem. It's what friends are for, right?" He seemed surprised when I shook my head. "We're not friends, Zhao." He was taken aback but put a hand on my shoulder. "Oh, come on, don't be like that. You're helping us, so I want to help you, even if you don't want to call us friends," he said with a smile. I brushed his hand from my shoulder but couldn't help myself from smiling as I turned away. Something about the way he said that reminded me so much of Jacob, but I didn't have time to think about that. So instead of lingering on it, I told him, "Whatever. Listen, get these people back to town and treat it as quickly as possible. I'm going into DU to deal with Lin Yu. I was about to say more, but Zhao interrupted, saying, "I'll have Ju bring them back. I'm going with you." He was taken aback when I spun back toward him and said, "You've already been shot twice. Isn't that enough?" He shrunk from me slightly, but then regrouped his courage and stood up straight. "Yeah, but this time will be different," he replied with a pump of his fist. "You know, for a guy who claims he can see the truth, you sure seem to live in a world of delusion." Chapter 7. Deep Down. Despite my disagreement, Zhao followed me into DU. We didn't get far before we came up to the barrier that prevents living souls from entering. I was surprised to see it still standing, but there was a fresh pair of tracks from the cart through the dirt, so I knew it had to have passed through. I put a hand on my chin and the other to the barrier, racking my brain for a way to break through. I heard Zhao ask from behind me, what are you doing?" It distracted me, so I decided to explain it to him. "This barrier prevents the living from passing through. I need to know how Lin Yu got by it if I'm going to confront her inside." "Oh, that makes sense. Here, I'd bet this'll help," Zhao said, surprising me. He walked to the leftmost edge of the barrier, where he pointed to something so subtle I hadn't noticed it. There was a small yellow ball about the size of a pea that was touching the wall and the barrier, seemingly sitting between them, though creating no open space where I could wedge my hand in. Nonetheless, Zhao reached for it and simply batted it to his right. The ball quickly flew to the right side of the entrance, pushing the barrier along with it. I dashed to the other side of the entrance and crossed the barrier. Zhao was being foolish as usual, so I signaled to him to cross as well. He did so, but he did it so clumsily that he tripped and slammed down into the dirt on the other side. I sighed as I made sure his body was clear, and when I was sure it couldn't hurt him, I swatted the ball back the other way, closing the barrier once again. Zhao seemed surprised when I returned to the left edge of the entrance and snatched the ball from the barrier with a smile. He got up and dusted himself off before he started to speak, but we started walking deeper as he spoke. "Taking that with us is smart. Unless they have another one, the living will be trapped inside DU." "Exactly. I'm surprised you put that together," I said. He seemed to take offense and roll his eyes. We walked quietly a few moments toward the massive fortress that served as the underworld. The moans and screams of the damned were getting on my nerves, so I asked, "Hey, what is this yellow thing anyway?" "It's a prayer bead, a type of conduit, like a wand is for magic. It works for divine miracles and intervention. Pretty useful in my line of work," he remarked. "Really? It works with divine energy? So what could someone do with something like this?" I asked. "Well, it usually depends on the divine who blessed it, or what they blessed it with. Though the one we found seems more like one of the beads the master of my temple has. It's more for general manipulation of divine works," he explained. "Like how it was just sort of stuck in the barrier and used to open it?" "Interesting," I said. Zhao was about to reply, but we passed a small hill in the dead brown landscape, and it revealed the main entrance to the fortress. There were no guards out front, and the doors were wide open. It made me feel uneasy. Zhao gasped, "Huh? Where are Oxhead and Horseface?" as he ran up to the entrance. I jogged up along with him and asked, "The who now?" "Oxhead and Horseface, the guardians of the gates of DU," he decried. "Never mind them. I'm guessing they're supposed to be watching the door, so where's that Mingsong lady?" I asked myself, dashing ahead. Zhao called, "Hey, wait," as I left him behind. So I called back, "Don't get yourself hurt this time!" And I didn't hear any response as I entered the prison of the dead. It was a quick dash through a long hallway, but only a moment after I entered, I spotted her. Lin Yu was standing strong with her blade drawn and bared over her head in a brutally offensive stance, her shining light obscuring the rest of the room from view. I saw my opportunity and drew my blade, dashing as fast as I could. From the hallway, I leaped straight at her, plunging my blade straight into her heart and ending this, once and for all. Or so I thought. She gasped and stumbled forward as her light dimmed and blood poured from her chest, but I was shocked when she looked back and locked eyes with me. "You!" she growled as blood dripped from her mouth. I used my foot and yanked my sword free of her chest, pushing her to her knees in the process. She immediately started getting to her feet. "I don't know how you're still standing, but no one gets up from this," I said, moving to decapitate her. She chuckled and blocked with her black blade, locking eyes with me once again. I heard crossbow bolts fire, but I was shocked when they didn't bounce off my skin like they had before. Their impact nearly knocked me aside, and I suddenly felt ill. Lin Yu got back to her feet and pressed a hand to her wound where my blade had pierced her chest just a few moments before, and I was shocked to find her wound had closed completely. Her light was starting to shine brightly again, but behind her I was able to see the group of men who shot me with their crossbows. They were reloading in front of their cart that was rocking back and forth violently from whatever was inside, and we were in a massive room that seemed like a great massive courtroom. And then I saw him. A massive deity or demon with huge horns and teeth, red skin, a surly wrinkled face, glowing yellow eyes, and a magnificent gray beard. He was so big his foot was the size of an estate. He was wearing a stately green robe and wielding a massive golden hammer. The room's defining feature was a giant balancing scale with one massive golden weighing cup on each side of the giant red judge in the center. My attention was taken by Lin Yu as her light flared up and she pointed her blade at me, a spiteful smile creeping across her lips. That poison will affect even you, Damon of Athens. If I were you, I'd run back to Sun Wukong and beg for his help. You're out of your depth. Why did you release Towdy from his prison? I demanded. She seemed downright taken aback. What? Towdy? Who the hell is Towdy? She asked. I warned you that taking the Book of Souls would have dire consequences, Mingsong, the giant red god said in a gruff, booming voice. You'll say anything to spare your life, Yang Wen. I'm going to kill you and end the cycle of death and rebirth. For the good of us all, Lin Yu asserted. She flourished her blade and immediately rushed in on the giant god of death. I was going to intervene, but I was already feeling ill from the poison and fell back against the wall. I let myself slide down as I tried to focus and pull out all the darts, but at some point everything went fuzzy. I was surprised when everything started coming back into focus not long after. I could hear the sounds of combat. Lin Yu shouted, "Fire!" and I heard a volley of bolts launch, making me flinch in my weakened state. I was surprised to feel someone touching my side, and my eyes bolted back open to see Zhao kneeling beside me, a golden light glowing from his hands. "Zhao?" I asked him deliriously, but he shushed me. I looked down to his hands and saw that not only was he healing me, but he had a small rosary of prayer beads wrapped around his hand, one of which was glowing bright yellow. I wasn't feeling ill anymore, so I started pushing myself to my feet, but he grabbed me by the shoulder and stopped me. I reluctantly stayed in place as the light faded from his prayer bead, but another one on the rosary started to glow. Zhao held out a hand and I felt something shift around me, like the air had gone completely still. Zhao smirked confidently before holding the same hand to himself, making a golden bubble of barely visible energy surround him completely. With that, he gave me a confident thumbs up, and I pushed myself to my feet. I took a second to gather my thoughts and take stock of the room. The soldiers all had their attention on Yan Wang. The giant red divine was struggling to block the heavy blows of Lin Yu's lengthy blade, and I could see clearly that he'd been pelted with the same bolts that had struck me just a few moments before. He looked woozy and was holding her back as best he could, dozens of bolts resting in his flesh and weakening him by the second. I knew there was no time to waste and involved myself quickly. As fast as I could, I intervened in the battle and managed to make Lin Yu back off for a moment. She flourished her blade with fury as she sneered, "How did you get up again?" "I'd be more worried about what's going to happen next if I were you," I growled, ready to have another chance at her. "You're the one who should be worried," she insisted before jumping out of the way and yelling, "Fire!" The soldiers fired a volley at me, and I was careful to deflect all the bolts that endangered me with my blade. But I was a bit surprised when I noticed that those that were near misses were bouncing right off. I smiled to myself, grateful for the gift that Zhao had given me. Lin Yu seemed to notice the barrier as well, growling, "The priest!" as Zhao tried sneaking closer around the edge of the room. "You should return whatever you took, Blade of Mingsong. I won't allow you to keep meddling in work so far beyond your comprehension," I said seriously, but it brought a smirk to her lips. "You think your little barrier turns the tables?" she asked snidely. I couldn't help but return her smirk. She moved so quickly she practically vanished, but I predicted she would appear on my left, since she was right-handed. Luckily I was right, and barely managed to block a powerful slash at my face. But I was so surprised by the sound of glass shattering that I hopped back to gain distance. As I landed, I noticed the barrier crumbling around me and drifting into the air like dust on the breeze. When my foot touched the ground, it was gone. "Fire!" she commanded. Luckily no one was behind me, so I just leaped out of the way with ease. At this point I'd had enough, so I dashed straight at Lin Yu and attacked. She blocked without issue, but I was surprised when she grabbed my cloak instead of slashing in retaliation. She headbutted me so hard she rang my bell before pulling me back and shouting, "Would you just piss off already?" Then she kicked me so hard in the chest that she shattered my ribcage and ripped my cloak as I went flying and smashed through the wall, landing in a heap on a pile of rubble just outside. I faintly heard Zhao call my name as footsteps started approaching, but as I yanked myself from the rubble, I heard Lin Yu order, "Capture him!" and her men ran up to Zhao with their crossbows. He promptly surrendered, and I don't really blame him. He was outmatched. I tried getting up again, but the pain in my chest was so great that I doubled over and shuddered in agony. All I could do was clutch at my chest and try not to breathe. When I finally looked up, I was just in time to see Lin Yu turning away from me, returning her attention to Yan Wang. I could only see the giant god's foot, propped upright like he was sitting or laying down. Lin Yu snapped her fingers and one of the soldiers rushed to her side. She simply said, "The jar," and the man dashed to the cart, quickly returning with a decorative blue jar with 2 wide handles and a lid resting on top. He set it down gently beside her and removed the lid. Then he set the lid down and went back to the cart, returning with a short length of iron chains. Once he was by her side once more, she pulled a brown scroll from her shawl and unfurled it before placing her hand directly in the center of a strange group of markings I couldn't really make out. Without warning, the scroll started glowing bright golden until its shining aura outshined Lin Yu's glowing light. Then the scroll flew directly to Yan Wang entirely of its own accord, literally rolling him up into the paper as the scroll rolled itself up once more. The scroll returned to Lin Yu's hand without any beckoning, but it was shaking even more violently than the cart was. She hesitated only a moment before stuffing the scroll into the jar and quickly moving her hand so the soldier could put on the lid. Then the two of them chained the lid to the jar so it couldn't be opened and locked it with a padlock and key. With another snap of her fingers, the soldier returned the jar to the cart. After that, she took stock of the situation, and after she ensured she had Zhao and her men, she then ordered them to start heading back toward the entrance. She looked my way and locked eyes with me, giving a look that clearly said, "If you try it again, I will kill you." But you know me, that was little more than a challenge. I immediately started to my feet, but I still couldn't get up yet. I stayed where I was, too pained to move. But when I looked back to Lin Yu, I saw her walking away with that smug-ass grin on her face, and that really pissed me off. I tried to use my anger to force myself up again, but it turns out I didn't have as much fury as I had broken bones. I don't know exactly how long I had to lay there with my face in the dirt, but I'd say it was around 10 minutes before I was finally able to get back up. I had to walk back to the entrance, but by the time I arrived, I felt good enough to run again. The barrier was closed as before, but I realized she might think I was trapped in Diyu and that Zhao had helped me inside. I smirked to myself as I pulled the prayer bead from my pocket and used it to leave Diyu without issue. When I arrived outside, I was shocked to find that the Mingsongs and their soldiers had simply left the villagers of Dongfu behind to fend for themselves in the forest, and they weren't looking good. As with the man with the near-melting face I described earlier, most had odd deformities mirroring decay. Many were simply wandering around aimlessly while the remaining few with their wits about them tried fruitlessly to organize them. Only 1 or 2 of them didn't seem to have any symptoms at all. I didn't like it, but I ran right through them, chasing after the tracks the cart had left through the forest. If I couldn't help those people directly, maybe dealing with the Mingsongs could reverse what they'd done. I ran for a few minutes before I could finally see them up ahead in the torchlight wielded by their men. I dashed up as quick as I could, readying my blade to deliver a devastating blow to Lin Yu as I leaped at her chest. But my blade was batted aside by Lin Yu, having drawn hers and turned so quickly it was like one instant she was facing forward as she walked, and the next she knocked my blade aside with unyielding rage. The look in her eyes was pure fury as I managed to land on the ground and hop back. She shouted, "You might have gotten me with that once, but I will not allow you to do it again." She pointed her blade at me and looked like she was about to say more, but she was interrupted by Liu firing a crossbow bolt at me. I deflected it, and he said, "You've done enough, Lin Yu. I'd like to settle our score from earlier," as he approached. He slung his crossbow to his hip and cracked his knuckles before drawing his glaive. She just turned and said, "Whatever, just make sure you kill him this time," before ordering our men to keep marching and continuing on. Liu chuckled at his sister's beckoning. I took a deep breath to center myself, ready to take advantage of the opportunity to fight him alone. The guy took his glaive into one hand and entered a wide stance like a bear about to pounce before leaping straight at me. I raised my sword and did a driving thrust at his chest, but he batted it aside with his glaive before punching me so hard in the face that I went rolling through the dirt. I managed to roll to my feet and dodge his follow-up attack, but he spun into a vicious blow to my stomach before kicking my sword right out of my hands and knocking me down. I started trying to stand up, but stopped when he pointed his glaive at my throat. I swallowed hard, not sure how I would make it out of this one. Liu only sneered at me. "You really were pitiful, you know?" he degraded. I was about to retort when he plunged the blade of his glaive into my throat and ripped it back out, filling my lungs and throat with my blood. I fell back from the shock, but my eyes went wide when he raised his glaive high. I put up my hands to stop him, but I only managed to flail as he drove it right into my heart. The burning agony in my chest was unbearable as I grasped at his blade's handle, but it was only another moment before everything went black. Chapter 8. Even death won't stop me. I had the strangest dream. Jacob and I were racing toward chaos, each trying to be the first to reach him. Then, suddenly, a bright white light appeared in front of us. Both of us reached for it as we ran, trying to snatch it and harness its power. But then, just before we reached chaos, Jacob stopped and gave me a hard shove forward, propelling me toward that shining light. I used his push and tried to grab it, but just when my fingers touched it, Chaos snatched it with the same fist he had then used to punch me in the face, knocking me backward. I fell onto my back and went straight through the floor, falling indefinitely into a sea of swirling purples and blacks. I watched Jacob start his battle with Chaos, going blow for blow against the old god, but then I turned away, facing the floor as I continued to fall. I felt like I was falling for eternity, but eventually I reached a new floor, made entirely of a viscous purple goo. I landed in it and bounced with an odd jiggly motion, my body flowing as it gyrated. I didn't pull myself out of it. I could feel it, slowly pulling me in. As I sank through the sticky goo, I came face to face with my own reflection. He looked just like me, but younger, happier. He was smiling, and it reminded me that I hadn't smiled like that in a long time. I took in a deep breath, and as I exhaled, I woke up. I jumped with a start at finding myself awake in a bed in a cluttered but homey room, filled to the brim with knickknacks, tapestries, and sewing materials. It kinda reminded me of my mom's house. I found myself surprised that the numerous blankets laid over me were so heavy that they were literally trapping my arms to my sides, and I needed to struggle to get free. But once I got one arm free, I was able to flip the blankets off myself and start getting up. I froze when my heartbeat hurt so badly that I was worried that I was about to have a heart attack, and then I doubled over when I felt it once more, clutching at my chest with both hands. I was anxious and gasping for breath, but when I settled down and the pain subsided, I looked to my chest and felt relief wash over me when I saw that I'd healed completely while I was asleep. The only mark remaining on my chest were some stitches, running up a now nearly invisible scar that faded away eventually. I wasn't sure where I was or where I should go, but I knew I didn't want to hang around there. I got out of bed and started toward the door, but when I grabbed the handle and tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. Locked? I asked myself quietly, trying to remember where I had been before all of this. But I was surprised to hear someone on the other side of the door ask herself, "What? But I didn't lock this." The voice didn't sound familiar. With a gulp, I released the handle and stepped back from the door, only to hear the jingling of keys from outside. I reached for my blade, only to find it missing from my hip as I heard the key enter the lock and watched the handle turn. An old lady opened the door and looked inside, surprised to see me standing upright, but with a somewhat queer look on her face. "Did you lock the door?" she asked with confusion. "No, I think we both tried to open it at the same time," I explained with a sigh of relief. "Oh, all right then. How are you feeling?" the kindly old woman asked. She turned around and grabbed a large bowl of soup on a tray with some bread she had set down behind her. "I'll be okay, but where am I? Who are you?" I asked as she entered. She gestured for me to lay back in bed, but didn't persist when I disobeyed. "I'm Hugh, and you're in the palace of the Monkey King. You should take it easy, young man. You nearly died out there. If Ren hadn't found you and brought you to me, I doubt you would have ever survived," she explained. Hugh was a hunched-over old woman with a face so wrinkled it always looked like she had her eyes closed. Her hair had gone white, and she wore an eloquent black robe-like dress with a red waist-wrap. I took a moment to take in her words and took the seat on the bed as she patted it gently beside her. She started trying to feed me the large bowl of soup, so I took it from her. The second the scent hit my nose, my mouth started watering. It smelled salty and savory, but sweet and delicious. It was some kind of pork and rice soup, and I ate the whole thing and drank the broth before devouring the crusty bread she brought with it. She just sat patiently and waited for me, seeming pleased that I enjoyed the meal. When I finished, I wiped off my mouth and gathered my thoughts. Thank you so much. I was starving. So Ren found me and brought me back here, right? Does that make you Ren's mother, or grandmother, or... I asked, hoping she would fill in the blank. "I'm her grandmother, yes. My daughter Hao passed away some time ago," she said sadly. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize," I expressed, feeling uncomfortable. "It's all right. We don't really like to talk about it much. Either way, I'm glad you're already feeling better. I'll let Ren know that it's all right to come and see you now, but I really think you should get some more rest." "I'd like to, but I just don't have time for that right now," I said, getting back to my feet. Hugh eyed me funny before smiling to herself and shaking her head. "You kids these days really don't take anything easy, do you?" she asked, seeming like she was asking herself. I answered anyway, though, saying firmly, "I won't speak for anyone else, but the easy way isn't usually the path I find myself on." She looked back to me, a look of recognition in her nearly covered eyes. That look made it all come rushing back to me. The events of the day, Sun going off to fight the Mingsong family, Zhao and the puppy, Towdy and the Book of Souls, all of it hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked back to Hugh and asked her, "Ma'am, Sun said I should ask you to read my mind and help me unlock my aura transformation. Is that something you think you could help with? I really need more power, as soon as possible.
Aura transformation? I suppose I do know a little about that. But are you sure you want me to read your mind? I need to see everything. And I mean everything. You won't be able to hide your secrets from me, she explained seriously. I only nodded. Well, if you're sure, I'll try, she agreed. With that, she extended a hand and reached out for me. I expected her to put her palm on my head or something like that, but instead she merely placed it on my shoulder. I could feel her presence reaching within me, but I was taken aback when she said, "Please try to relax. You're too on guard." It took me a second to register what she said, but then I closed my eyes and started breathing deeply, focused only on my breath. I felt her spirit in my mind, wandering my memories like they were an art gallery to be observed. Each one she viewed flashed before my eyes, and I struggled to remain meditative, especially when my most painful memories were seen by her. Still, I barely managed to stay composed and relaxed enough for her to try and help me. When she was finally done, she took a deep sigh of relief, seeming as though my memories might have caused her some anxiety as well. "You've lived a hard life, young man," she said sadly. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. A quiet, "yeah," was all I could muster in reply. She gently patted my shoulder before removing her hand from it, but then she looked away like she was lost in thought. After a few moments, she said, "You seem like a very direct and decisive person, so I imagine the aura transformation that would bring you the most use would be a raw, yellow form. Since they rely on aspects of a person's personality, the ability is strengthened greatly when the user is in an emotional state that suits the form." I was a bit overwhelmed by what she was saying, so I just asked, "Well, what's that mean, then?" She seemed a bit bemused, but smiled at me and said, "It means there's something in your mind holding you back from being your most direct self, something you subconsciously wish to overcome." She paused and waited for me to respond, but I was still processing that information, so to help me along, she said, "Usually it's closer than you realize. Something you simply choose not to deal with instead of actually going through with what you truly wanted to do." Well, those are common anyway. "Okay, but I don't understand what that means, or what I need to do," I replied. "You just need to listen to your heart," was a powerful reply. I took at least a few minutes mulling over what she told me, but I still didn't feel any closer to understanding. Eventually she said, "You know, aura transformations in demigods are rare. I'm surprised your friend was able to achieve one, but you shouldn't struggle to hold yourself to that standard." She was going to say more, but I interrupted her. "I don't have any choice. I need more power if I'm going to help Sun face the Mingsong family." "You should just leave them to him. I'm sure he won't need any help," Hugh said. "I don't know. That Mingsong woman was stronger than she's let on. I ran my sword right through her heart and it didn't even faze her," I explained. Hugh nodded. "Yes, I saw that in your memories. But you have to understand, Sun has been immortal for millennia. He knows how to deal with this sort of thing. I'm much more concerned about that monster Towdy and whatever it's doing to those poor townspeople from Dongview," she explained. "I'm worried about them both," I replied. "Me too," she agreed, taking a long, thoughtful pause. After a moment, she reached into her robe and pulled out a stitching needle. "Well, let's take those stitches out." I was a bit nervous, but it wasn't so bad. The hard part was really just the sitting still. When she finished, she examined her work before she nodded to herself and took the empty bowl from beside me, putting it back on her tray. Then she picked up the tray and got headed toward the door. On her way out, she said, "Please wait here for a little while. I'll send Ren in with your things and some clothes for you. Be careful out there. Oh, and try not to be so hard on yourself. We all make mistakes." And with that, she walked out the door, closing it behind her. I stood up and stretched myself out as I thought more about what she said, her words running through my mind again and again. Even so, I couldn't manage to think of anything that was making me a less direct person, so I didn't exactly come up with any ideas for how to transform. Eventually, my train of thought was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," I replied. When the door opened, Ren stepped inside with a pile of clothes and my blade resting atop them. "Hey, how are you feeling?" Ren asked with a smile. She seemed pleased to see me all right. "I'll survive," I said, noticing she had more clothes with her than just my ruined cloak. I took my sword belt and secured it around my waist before placing my blade through one of the loops. "You were in pretty rough shape when I found you out there. I'm glad to see you're all right," she said distantly, seeming as though having seen me that way had pained her greatly. "Your Gran said if you hadn't brought me back I would have died, so I guess I owe you some thanks," I replied, starting to look through the clothes. She was about to say something, but the clothes sucked, so I asked, "What is this crap? Don't you guys have anything to wear in this place that won't make me look like some kind of noble or something?" Ren seemed a bit taken aback and offended. She crossed her arms and asked, "Are you kidding? This is some of our best stuff." I eyed her and she rolled her eyes and sighed before saying,
I guess I can take you to look at what we have. But then I spotted something I hadn't noticed before. The black robe she'd brought me hung just past my knees and would make a perfect coat if left open. So I grabbed a pair of white pants and pulled them on before throwing the robe over my arms and using my sword belt to secure the pants to my waist. Last, I tied a red waist wrap around everything to keep the robe from flowing behind me. "Ready?" Ren asked, seeming like she was tired of waiting. I nodded, and she pumped her fists with excitement. "Great! So what's the plan?" "Ever heard of a place called Ordos?" I asked. "Yeah, of course I have," Ren said, seeming a bit confused why I was asking. "Apparently, that's where the Mingsong family lives. Your dad said he was headed there. I know your gran said it will be fine, but I can't shake the feeling that he needs my help," I explained. Ren seemed outright confused now, asking, "Really? Why's that?" "The people who've died since death has been nullified are decaying. Their bodies are transforming as their souls burn up what remains of their flesh and their bones, and becoming almost like zombies or the undead. But that Mingsong woman, I stabbed her right through the heart, but her wound closed up and she didn't seem to be rotting like the others," I explained. "So what does that mean?" Ren asked. "I guess we'll find out in Ordos." Chapter 9. Eternal Loyalty. Ren led me through the darkness in near silence. I tried to focus on Ren's chi and practice honing my senses as we ran across the countryside at high speed. Although I was able to follow her, I didn't feel like I had really gotten much practice. Still, I kept at it the entire way, knowing that it could prove an invaluable tool against someone like Liu. It took us about 10 minutes to reach Ordos from the palace. When we broke free of the forest, we followed the road before crossing a wide desert, and from there we stumbled into the huge city of Ordos. I noticed as we crossed the desert, we finally breached the cover of the hanging clouds, and the full moon was shining its light down upon the land. There were a handful of buildings that were 3 stories or higher, but the city's size was relative to the large amount of ground it covered. From our approach from the north, we could see a large plateau with elegant palaces resting atop it. I guessed that we might find the Mingsong family there, so that's where we headed first. We scaled the plateau in a single bound with ease, and after asking around a market, we were able to get directions to the Mingsong estate. It was a large palace with a huge plot of land and soldiers all over the place, each in that same matching blue armor we'd seen before. We came upon them from the backside and found little but a small family graveyard beside a single decrepit tree. The tree was pale gray and its branches were completely free of leaves, reaching for the sky like hands grasping up at the moon, trying to take its light for their own. But I noticed there weren't leaves on the ground here. Since the lack of leaves called my attention to it, I noticed what appeared to be the image of an old woman's face scarred into the ground. It stretched between the closest grave and the tree, and she had her eyes closed. The base of the tree seemed to be part of the odd pattern. I knelt down to get a closer look, but immediately stood up with surprise when the mouth opened slightly, and I heard a quiet wheezing gasp. Ren squeaked with fright, and I asked, "What the hell?" But the being didn't react. "Hey, can you hear me?" I asked. It still didn't respond. "I don't know what the heck that thing is, but it gives me the creeps. Let's get out of here, now," Ren begged, tugging at my arm. I kinda wanted to go too, but I wanted to give it one more chance and asked, "Are you related to the Mingsong family?" And we were both taken aback when the face's eyes opened wide. I stared into her empty eyes for what felt like an eternity before repeating my question. She still didn't reply. Instead, she simply closed her eyes and seemingly returned to her slumber. I tried getting her attention by stepping, stomping, and jumping on her, and I even dug my knife into her, but she still didn't react. Eventually, I gave up, and Ren and I returned to scouting out the Mingsong family estate. There was a particularly large group of soldiers gathered in the courtyard, a quiet unease among them as they cautiously chattered with each other. We walked by the front, and Ren pulled me aside after we examined the entrance up close. "Damon, I can sense my dad inside," she said, pointing toward the palace. I figured he would be. "Who's that?" I asked, looking toward a high balcony. Ren looked up too and saw the old man I pointed out. He was shorter than Ren's waist and had a long white mustache, bushy eyebrows, and a bald head, but he had an intensely pleased look in his blue eyes. He was wearing an eloquent lord's red robe with a metal mantle on the shoulders that had spikes that pointed up on each end. Ren didn't have time to respond before he started speaking. "Men, my children have returned from their mission, and with it they have effectively ended death across the land," he said as Liu and Lin Yu stepped out from behind him and stood at his side. The men responded with a resounding cheer for their success. I immediately noticed that Liu had bandage wrappings over his right eye, but Lin Yu looked no worse for wear. I was surprised to see a group of soldiers in a specially decorated armor take the front, standing before the men gathered in the grounds. The old man continued by saying, "And now, those among you so loyal as to give your lives for us I ask you, sever your head from your body, and serve us eternally in undeath." Everyone seemed quite taken aback, all except the decorated soldiers and the Mingsongs themselves. The decorated soldiers drew their swords and knelt down before their army, each leaning their neck into their blade until they removed their own heads. Their bodies flopped to the ground with graceless thuds as a few of the soldiers cried out in terror. Ren covered her mouth, looking like she was fighting back the urge to be sick. Just as a few started breaking ranks and fleeing for their lives, there was a collective gasp as the bodies of the beheaded started pushing themselves back to their feet, heads left on the ground like discarded pistachio shells. The bodies stood upright and held their weapons aloft. The men were still quite unsure, and murmuring rose from them, but it was broken by the enthralled call of the elder Mingsong. "At last! We really have ridden the land of death. Now, men, take the upgraded weaponry we've provided you and prepare for battle against General Wong. His men pose an immediate danger to our lands, and we cannot allow this threat to go unchecked. But now you may march into battle without the fear of death." The men started chanting, "Live forever, General Lai," repeatedly. But something about all this didn't seem right. Something about that name felt familiar. My train of thought was interrupted by General Mingsong addressing his men once the chanting died down. "And now, my son has been blessed with an eye that can see the truth. Remove your bandages, Li Yu, and tell us all what you see," the general bid. As his father commanded, Li Yu unwrapped his eye and opened it, revealing the glowing pupil beneath. There wasn't a doubt in my mind that the eye had once belonged to Zhao. I immediately recognized the bright yellow iris and the pupil that shined like starlight, just the same as Zhao's eyes. Li Yu looked over the crowd for only a moment before he seemed greatly pained. He clutched at his eyes with both hands and started howling in agony. The old general gestured to his soldiers up on the balcony and quietly asked them to remove him. Lin Yu looked white as a ghost, and the soldiers seemed as though they were quite distressed by Li Yu's reaction. After clearing his throat, he said, "Clearly something has gone wrong with Li Yu's surgery. Please don't worry about him. Just as with all of you, he can't die anymore either. I assure you, he will be cared for with the highest of hospitality. For now, set your minds to the upcoming battle with General Wong. Dismissed." There it was again. But this time I remembered. General Wong, the leader of that ragtag group that took over the town I freed. "General Wong is dead and has been for at least a few days. Surely someone with as much influence as you already knows that," I called up to the balcony. General Lai was taken aback, and Lin Yu pointed her finger at me with fury in her eyes. "Damon, what are you doing?" Ren asked with shock. "Who the hell are you?" the old man asked. "This whelp has been trying to interfere in your plans for some time now, father," Lin Yu informed. "Oh, really? Then why haven't you dealt with him yet?" Lai demanded. Lin Yu flinched from him before responding. "Last I saw him, Li Yu had driven his glaive through his heart," in a somewhat alarmed tone. The old general growled and snapped his fingers rudely. "Think, Lin Yu. You removed death from the world. Of course he didn't die from being stabbed through the heart," he said, tapping himself in the temple. She looked like it struck her like a pallet of bricks. "Now go down there and capture him," he insisted. Lin Yu was surprised to be ordered as such, but immediately leapt over the balcony, falling 4 stories before landing in a cloud of dust on the ground. "Ren, go try and help your dad," I said. She was taken aback, but almost immediately nodded and took off behind me, letting me hold off Lin Yu from the front so she could approach from another angle. I had expected Lin Yu to lunge at me, but I was surprised to see her merely standing there when the dust settled, her purple eyes staring up at the sky. I looked up too and immediately noticed that the large cloud cover that had been over the forest and the surrounding area was either now expanding or moving to cover this area as well. It was only a matter of moments before the moon was overcast and its light faded from the battlefield, leaving only Lin Yu's shining light as the primary source of illumination. "What are you waiting for, Lin Yu? Get him!" General Lai commanded. Lin Yu stood silent a moment, now looking off to the north, where Ren and I had come from. "I'm giving you an order," he insisted. "There's something coming," she replied. I was shocked to say the least. Following her line of sight down the street, I was barely able to see the edge of the plateau from the torches of passers-by. And there on the edge of the risen ground, I saw them. A pair of stone horns that twisted at the end, attached to a stone mask with burning yellow eyes underneath, climbed the plateau before standing tall at its edge. "Towdy, what are you doing here?" I asked myself, not sure what to make of the situation. The beast didn't acknowledge me, moving down the street like a shadow as it vanished and reappeared closer and closer. It was moving toward the palace, but I was stuck in place, not sure what to do. Now the soldiers were really fleeing, scattering like insects after their log was moved. But the headless one stayed in place, seemingly entirely unaware of the danger lurking toward them. As Towdy arrived on the scene, General Lai retreated back into the safety of his palace. Lin Yu pointed her blade at the approaching monster before commanding, "Back down, creature! You have no business here!" She took up an aggressive stance, but Towdy slammed her aside with its horns before descending upon the beheaded soldiers, biting into them and eating their gray souls burning inside them. Lin Yu roared with dominance as she ran back and drove her blade directly into the beast's body, but it didn't seem to have any effect. I decided to try and help the soldiers, unsure if they could be saved. I felt power bubbling up inside as I dashed in and took a violent slash at Towdy, but my blade passed right through, like I was attacking nothing at all. With a simple shift of its body, Towdy managed to turn and kick Lin Yu and I both, sending us flying into the fence. We landed in a heap together and I immediately got back to my feet, electrifying my blade in a desperate attempt to damage the monster. Before I started charging him, Lin Yu grabbed my shoulder and pushed herself past me, saying, "Get out of my way!" before lunging at him full force. Towdy didn't even seem fazed by her attack, so I leapt at him too. I gasped with surprise when Towdy was shocked by the electricity around my sword, and it seemed to allow me to slash him as well. I couldn't help but smile to myself, but it was wiped right off my face when Towdy turned to face me with rage in his yellow eyes. He charged at me, so I slashed with as much force as I could muster, but his stone mask seemed to fend off the cutting edge of my blade. I held fast as he started pushing me through the dirt, but I was surprised when Lin Yu joined my side, slashing Towdy to apply pressure with her blade and keep him from forcing me back. "You hurt him just now. If I hold him off, can you keep damaging him?" she demanded. "Yeah, I think I can," I replied, straining myself to fend him off. I was shocked to find I didn't feel the pressure of the beast pushing me anymore, as Lin Yu planted her feet and put a hand on my shoulder. "Then go," she said, starting to push me. But it seems Towdy had been listening to us, because before her hand left my shoulder, the beast gave a low, whinnying roar, causing its eyes to flash pink, and my senses to start failing me all at once. I collapsed to the ground as darkness overcame me, taking all of reality along with it. I had expected to suffer through my worst memories as I had before, but instead, this time I saw something incredibly different. I still saw memories, but they didn't belong to me. I was baffled to find myself walking through Lin Yu's memories, experiencing them as if I were her, flashing through her trauma like I was walking through a dream. It started young, when she was no more than 4. She was torn from her mother and forced to undergo training as a blade of Mingsong, a position held solely by the women of the Mingsong lineage. Her teachers taught her an incredibly violent style of swordplay and did not hold back on physical discipline, sometimes beating the poor girl within an inch of her life. Whenever she behaved poorly, Lin Yu was beaten with whips or flails, and she quickly learned not to disobey her family. When she was 8, she was forced to be branded with a symbol of eternal loyalty to her family. The mark was literally burned into the center of her back by a hot branding iron, marking her as a warrior of her family name. Although I couldn't read Chinese, she could, so I was able to learn its meaning through her own understanding of it. The marking was of her family crest and read, "Achieve power, achieve immortality." Liu and Lin Yu had once had another older sister, Lei Jing. Lin Yu had looked up to her all her life, but she had to watch her die when she was 12 years old at the hands of Sun Wukong. She had been leading an attack on Sun's family, and they managed to kill his wife and son. So, in retaliation, he killed Lei Jing, using her death to send a message of warning to the Mingsong family. Lei Jing's death seemed to have taken hold of General Lai's mind, and he grew obsessed with their family motto, desperate to keep the others in their family alive. Eventually, he plotted the scheme they had underway to end death once and for all, putting it under the banner of his twisted idea of the greater good to build support. Lin Yu's mother, Mei, had also been a blade of Mingsong, and she'd often advised her, "The only thing that matters is tradition. Follow our creed," and that stuck with Lin Yu. The death of Lei Jing had also been very hard on Lin Yu's mother, and she died of grief a year or 2 later, having never recovered from her depressive state. General Lai was driven further into his plans to end death and made Lin Yu swear an oath of revenge. As training to become strong enough to defeat Sun Wukong, she walked the warpath her father laid out. She slaughtered thousands on the battlefield before eventually meeting an army protected by a great white dragon named Bai Long. She slew it with little effort, and through her perspective, I knew this meant she was going to gain immortality through this action. I was just about to see how when I bumped right into her. Lin Yu seemed just as surprised as I was that we bumped into each other, but as soon as she saw me, she looked somewhat sad. Her expression sunk until she looked grim, or perhaps even pitiable. I could tell from the look in her eyes that she'd seen my past, just as I'd seen hers. "I'm sorry for looking through your memories. You've lived just as hard a life as I have," Lin Yu said. "I don't think it's either of our faults, but it's nice to know that we have more in common than I thought. I suppose this is true, but I still can't allow you to end my father's plan," she replied. "But you saw my memories. So you saw that this undeath isn't what Lai thinks it is. These people losing their lives right now aren't going to stay like normal people for long," I asserted. "Maybe. But even if that is true, I cannot break the oath I've taken," she said sadly. "Why not? Your father's lying to you, and I can tell that you know it. These people aren't going to survive this, Lin Yu," I said, starting to get frustrated. She crossed her arms and gave me a sour look. "Why do you even care? It's not like you know any of these people," she said. "So what? Why do I have to know them to not want them to die?" I asked, clenching my fists. Lin Yu looked surprised at my words, as if they had struck a chord within her. We had been walking toward each other down hallways of each other's memories, so Lin Yu turned back and stared down the hallway she'd been walking through for a few moments. Without turning back, she asked me, "Tell me, your family betrayed your trust once just the same as mine is now. What made you hang on to hope that things could be made right again?" I was a bit struck, not entirely sure what she was talking about. "My family betrayed my trust, that's true," I said, trying my best to remember a memory I wished to forget. As if in response to my efforts, the entire environment changed, showing my memory in the very sky of the mental landscape we were standing on. My eyes went wide as I experienced my worst memory again for the first time in years. Jacob and I had gotten into trouble again, though I couldn't remember what for. I knew it was bad, though. The memory showed me telling my mother and father, and their horrible reaction to it. My mom told my dad that he would be the one to punish me before leaving in an embarrassed hurry, seeming too upset by what Jacob and I had done to face me right then. Still, whatever it was, I knew deep down in my heart that I didn't deserve the punishment I got for it. I was only 10 years old, and my father grabbed me by the scruff of my neck before marching me out into the woods. There, he pushed me down a deep hole before saying, "Maybe this'll teach you to stay out of trouble for once. And if not, maybe it'll get you the hell out of my hair," he said with disgust in his voice. I tried climbing out of that pit every way I could imagine, but there was a small stream running through it that splashed up onto most of the rocks, making it entirely unscalable. The first day wasn't so bad. I spent most of it calling for help, begging for someone to come and free me from my mossy prison. I called for help until my voice was hoarse, but no one ever came for me that day. The second day I tried calling for help again, but still no one came for me. On the third day I started getting desperate and tried climbing out of the hole anyway, but I slipped on the slick stones and smashed my arm on one of them, breaking it. It was excruciating, and I passed out from the pain. On the fourth day, I was in so much pain and so hungry I was getting delirious, unable to make sense of what was happening. I was starting to think I'd actually been left to die in that hole, and panic set in for some time. Even so, it didn't help me get out, and I managed to keep from hurting myself further as I kept looking for any way out. On the fifth day, I was so exhausted and weak that I could barely stay conscious. The pain in my arm made it difficult to sleep, and I was beginning to feel ill. On the sixth day, I couldn't move my fingers on my broken arm anymore. I couldn't force myself to get up. I was dying, and I knew I didn't have long. If someone didn't find me in the next day or two, I was going to die. I couldn't keep my eyes open. My mouth was so dry, and the smooth stones underneath me were cold and uncomfortable. I was sure of it. I was going to die out there. My father had killed me for being an unruly child and embarrassing our family. But then I heard a voice. "Oh my God! Is that—" I immediately recognized it. I still couldn't open my eyes, but I reached up as much as I could and gasped a wheezing breath. I needed his attention. "Dad! Dad, I found him! He's over here! Come quick!" Jacob called out, beckoning his father to come and help me. I couldn't do anything but smile to myself as Demetrius's large, thudding footsteps shook the ground when he ran over. His deep voice boomed orders immediately, sensing the urgency of the situation. "Jacob, tie this rope to yourself. I'll lower you down safely and then you grab him, all right? I'll pull you both up." Jacob didn't hesitate to follow his father's command. The two of them helped me out of the hole and got me to medical attention. And ever since that near-death experience, I've never viewed my family the same. Lin Yu brought me back to the moment by somberly repeating her question. "Your family betrayed you, so why did you carry on?" You watched The Memory, didn't you? It's true that family doesn't mean much to me anymore, but I have friends that matter to me. Friends that I know will never give up on me, I explained. Lin Yu turned to face me and looked me right in the eyes, like she was searching for something. She looked in my eyes a few moments before new words came to me, and as I thought of them, the expression on her face began to change. Chapter 10. The Truth We Deny. I said, in a weird way, it's kinda like I can build my own family now. One I want to grow strong enough to protect. Lin Yu looked like she didn't know what to say. Before she could gather her thoughts, we were both surprised by the sound of shattering glass. The sky of the illusory realm we inhabited cracked like a window before shattering entirely and raining unyielding light down upon us. My senses were completely overwhelmed, but I snapped back to reality when the smell of smoke assaulted my nostrils. I opened my eyes and realized I was laying in the courtyard, my body on top of Lin Yu's. I started pushing myself off her and up to my feet, but I was interrupted when she smacked me hard across the face, knocking me over. Don't get fresh with me just because we... What happened to you? She asked, seeming to immediately forget her anger. I pushed myself out of the dirt and rubbed my throbbing cheek as I looked to her. Happened to me? What are you talking about? I replied. I was surprised when she drew her black blade and approached. I was on guard, but she knelt down in front of me, showing me my own reflection. There in her blade, I saw glowing red eyes staring back at me, not my normal light blue. Red? Well, I'll be damned, I said, looking to my hands and finding them surrounded by a thin, bright red aura. Before either of us could say anything else, we were taken aback by the concussive force of a huge explosion in the Mingsong Palace. It literally pushed me to my feet, shoving Lin Yu and I back about a meter through the dirt. When the force of the blast subsided, she immediately called out her brother's name and started charging toward the site of the explosion, leaping on top of the burning palace before jumping out of sight. Can't I catch my breath for a damn second? I asked myself, following after her. I landed on the roof of the palace to find nearly half of it blown to bits by a fiery explosion, covering the building and landscape in burning wreckage. There in the center of the inferno stood Towdy, completely unfazed by the flames as it ripped apart those who perished in the blast, devouring their souls without prejudice. Suddenly I heard a familiar voice crying out for help from inside the building, begging for anyone close by to free him from danger. Lin Yu was engaged with Towdy and Ren didn't seem to be nearby, so I ran to the sound, hoping I might find him. And sure enough, there he was in a cell, locked behind bars. At first I thought Zhao was alright, but as I approached, I saw firsthand the horror the Mingsong family had thrust upon him. Zhao's right eye was missing entirely, leaving only a pink hollow hole where it once rested. The poor guy was terrified, blind, and clutching that black puppy for dear life. Zhao, it's going to be all right. I've got you, I told him, trying to reassure him. Damon, please tell me it's really you. Those Mingsongs took my eye, he squealed with terror. I didn't want him to have to wait another second and smashed through the bars a couple steps from him before scooping him up and managing to get him out safely. I set him down just outside the graveyard. You're okay now, Zhao. Just stay here and wait for me. This'll all be over soon, I said, wanting him to hold on to hope. He was still petrified and couldn't reply. I knew I needed to end this quickly, so I turned back toward the building to find General Lai standing there, holding a large crossbow. You're going to call off that beast, or I'm going to kill you. Right here, right now, Lai commanded. I didn't call it here. You did, I told him, surprising the old man. That's Light Eater Towdy. It's here to eat the souls of those who can't cross over into the next life because you idiots were messing with the natural order. Lai's eyes opened wide for a moment, but then he narrowed them again. You're a filthy liar. Why would such a creature even exist? He said, wagging his crossbow at me. Don't believe me if you want to, but I want to seal that thing up as much as you do, I replied. The old man growled at me and fired his crossbow, but he didn't even perceive my speed as I moved behind him. I hesitated a moment, but still decided on what needed to be done. The old man's head moved wildly as he looked about for me. How did he do that? I was looking right at him. I told him, You're too slow, old man, before taking a brutal slash at his neck. I found myself flabbergasted when Liu dashed up and blocked the blow with a shield bearing his family crest. However, my attention was taken by him completely when I found his eyes open. Zhao's eye still where his once was, but the frightening part? His mouth had been sewn shut. Just the sight of it made me back off on instinct, my eyes wide and horrified. Liu, what happened to you? I asked. He tried to answer me with some muffled huffing I can only describe as disturbing, but of course I couldn't understand him. I swallowed hard before taking my sword in both hands, anger starting to rise in my chest. Lai stepped up beside him, a hateful look in his eyes. It seems these eyes that see the truth caused my dear son to speak only lies, he said. I bared my teeth, knowing where this would be going next. So you sewed your own son's mouth shut to keep him from telling everyone the truth about what you were doing. Disgusting, I replied. You're an old fool, Lai. Everyone could already see what you were doing was twisted. Liu, you can't really still be defending your father if you see the truth now. Look at what he's done to you. He doesn't care about you. You're a means to an end to him. A simple tool. I was going to say more, but I was taken aback when the muzzled, bulky man charged me. I was holding my blade tight, but I felt something inside me. It was telling me that Liu could still be spared at the least. He might not be a great person, but he was still being misled and tortured into submission, just like Lin Yu. I took a deep breath and sheathed my blade, finding Liu to seem far slower than he had in our previous battles. He approached quickly and raised his glaive, but he couldn't defend himself when I kicked his shield aside and planted my fist in his sternum. Liu's knees buckled and he grasped the spot where I'd struck him before falling to the ground and dropping his weapons. He wasn't out cold, but his wheezing breaths made me think I might have broken some bones. Still, I knelt down and ran my knife along the stitching that held Liu's lips together. It sounded like it caused him great pain, but I started removing the stitches so he could speak. I didn't get many out before I heard Lai reload his crossbow. I looked up just before the old man fired at me and managed to snatch the bolt out of the air with ease. He was taken completely by surprise when I broke off the poison tip and flicked it back at him, saying, "You dropped this." It nailed him right between the eyes and he went down hard, grabbing at his face like a whining child who ran into a table. The old man got up and started heading toward the graveyard, but I didn't have time to worry about that right then and kept pulling out Liu's stitches. When I finished, I asked him, "Liu, you need to tell me the truth your eye showed you. I need to figure out what's going on if I'm going to put a stop to it." Unfortunately, Liu was too dazed to respond. I tried rousing him for a few more moments before getting frustrated and giving up. I was just getting back to my feet when Ren ran up to me from inside the palace. "Damon, I can't find my dad inside anywhere," she said urgently. "He's probably chained inside a jar, like that god of death," I explained. "Chained inside a jar? Wait, I swear I saw a few jars like that somewhere, but," she said to herself, trying to jog her memory. She was about to say more, but we were surprised when Liu started pushing himself to his feet beside us. "Right, no death means they have no reason to give up," I said, drawing my blade to defend us. "You interloping son of a bitch," Liu said as he got to his feet, seeming like he was struggling to breathe properly. "He's trying to help you," Ren said, but I held up a hand to tell her to stop. "Let's get this over with," I said, taking an aggressive stance. I could hear the booming sounds of Lin Yu trying to fend off Touty close by. We were all a bit taken aback when General Lai called out, "Liu, get the jar and bring it here." "But father," Liu replied as he looked back to him, but the old general interrupted him, saying, "Don't you dare tell me that I have shown you a false truth again, boy. Now go and do as you're told." "But which one?" he tried asking again. "Go!" Lai screamed, unreasonable fury ripping at his raspy throat. Liu grumbled to himself and started trying to move around me, but I got in his way. "Tell me the truth your eye showed you," I insisted, since Liu seemed to feel like talking. He gulped and looked quite frustrated, but outside of a glance to his father, he didn't respond. A moment or two passed before Ren broke the silence by stepping up to me and grabbing my arm. "Let him go, Damon," she said, a conflicted look in her eyes. I rolled my eyes and said, "Whatever," in response. Liu eyed me carefully but started going around me again, seeming satisfied when I didn't try to get in his way. I was going to ask Ren why I just let Liu go, but after he headed off, she followed after him. Lai fired another bolt at me, but I dodged with ease before running right up to him, making him gasp and fall back onto the ground. He pushed himself backward through the dirt frantically until he backed right into that white tree close to the headstones. His hand touched that face on the ground and it quietly moaned, seeming to frighten Lai even more. I drew my blade as I stepped up to him and pointed it at the old man's throat. He didn't say anything, so I said, "Tell me the truth, Lai. What's really going on here? You haven't ended death for this false immortality. You aren't that stupid. I see it in your eyes." "I'm not telling you a damn thing, you ingrate," he replied. I knelt down and grabbed a fistful of his robes to pull him closer. "You'd really sacrifice all these people's lives for nothing and expect everyone to just let you get away with it? You will tell me the truth, I shouted, starting to get really pissed off. I heard Zhao not far away say, "The truth?" to himself. And what will you do if I don't? Kill me? Lai asked. Immortality won't do you any good if your body is in pieces, I threatened, but he didn't seem fazed in the least. Or maybe you'd prefer I let Towdy eat your soul. This time the old man's eyes opened wide and he struggled against me, but he remained mute in his resistance. Just then, Lin Yu was slammed through a nearby wall and sent tumbling into the dirt before she scraped a hand across the ground and regained her footing. She looked pretty banged up and she was out of breath, but when she retook her stance, she did so with such ferocity that she clearly had plenty of fight left in her. Towdy emerged from the damaged wall she'd been thrown through, a wicked grin on his lips. Lin Yu, help me, Lai begged, but she flourished her blade and stood firm. I've got my hands full at the moment, she said, her light growing brighter by the moment. Towdy seemed offended by the shining light of Lin Yu, but I was surprised when I noticed the odd beast seemed to be sniffing the air, its nostrils gently rising and falling as it started looking around for the source of the scent. In an instant, Towdy sank back into the darkness. Lai looked about for him in horror, but Lin Yu turned back and looked beyond Lai and I. I trailed her eyes and saw Towdy, looming tall right beside us in the darkness. I immediately made distance and took up a defensive stance, not sure what the creature was up to. Lai watched me go before looking over where Lin Yu and I were staring, to then jump up and scramble away in terror, hiding behind his own daughter. Zhao carefully stepped closer to me, and he was doing something with his eye patch, but I was too focused on Towdy to see what right then. I guided him with a push and said, "Stay behind me." Towdy was sniffing the ground near the white tree and looked up when Liu arrived with Ren not far behind. She looked like she'd gotten the hell kicked out of her, but she was dragging herself after Liu just the same. Liu set down the 4 jars and immediately looked to his father, shouting, "Which jar did you need, father?" Lai jumped with surprise, seeming he hadn't even noticed his son's arrival. Lai pointed to the largest one and Liu picked it back up, but hesitated as Ren approached and made ready to open the other jars. Lai pointed from one jar to the tree and said, "Bring it to the..." before he stopped cold. When he stopped, I noticed a quiet laughter. It was raspy, unhinged and slow, but I noticed that no one here was laughing. I looked back to Towdy to find him reaching his head down toward the ground, and that was where I found the source of the sound. The woman's face etched into the dirt. She was the one laughing. Towdy reached down and took a cautious bite of the dirt, and the woman's laugh grew louder, more maniacal, and even more threatening than before. Suddenly, the entire tree moved as fluidly as a hand and latched onto Towdy, a bright purple light outshining Lin Yu as it overpowered him and forced the beast to his knees. I was horrified to see the woman's mouth and Towdy move in unison, as 1,000 voices said, "The jar," through them. Liu was frozen holding the jar, as the bright light blinded us all. General Lai started toward his son and said, "What are you waiting for? Do it!" The bulky man fumbled with the keys as his shaky hands tried to stop him, but he overcame his reservations with a grimace and inserted the key into the lock. I gulped hard, not sure what I should do. Liu opened the jar and a scroll immediately flew from it of its own accord before getting snatched by a bending branch of the white tree. Chapter 11. Unyielding Deities. Zhao gasped beside me. I glanced over to see he had moved his eye patch from his left eye to his right, but he had also removed the bandages over the eye he'd had surgery to save, and he was looking right at Towdy, the tree, and the scroll. The ground shook as the bright light coming from the tree started to overtake them all, its glow spreading until all 4 beings were glowing so brightly they were mere silhouettes in the light. But then those silhouettes melded together and shrunk, becoming a new being altogether. The ground was shaking so terrible that even Lin Yu and I were struggling to stay standing while everyone else was toppled by their shifting balance. Suddenly, it seemed even the cloudy darkness itself was being absorbed by this new being, being physically sucked into its growing mass. It pulsed disgustingly as its brightness shone so bright it rivaled the sun, making me need to shield my eyes. When the shaking light finally stopped and the light began to fade, I found myself standing with Lin Yu, our mouths agape at the glowing white body we still couldn't see through the light. When the glowing light surrounding the merger faded too, it revealed a being I'd never imagined underneath. She had eyes of pure black and white hair that hung down around her jaw and framed her face, and she wore a stone mask not too dissimilar to Towdy's, though with smaller horns. Her skin was dark red, and she had a single, fleshy, twisted horn coming from the right side of her forehead that pointed straight up. She only stood up to my waist and nor nothing at all, her human-like body left naked by the merging of disjointed beings. Her chest was flat like a young boy's, but she had wide curved hips, and her hands and feet were hooves that angled outward and split apart into odd finger-like appendages. "Finally, our plan worked, Lai," she said with an almost vicious undertone. "Mother?" Liu asked, fright and confusion in his eyes. The new being smiled at Liu and simply nodded. Lin Yu looked as though she hadn't recognized her mother as of yet, but this exchange seemed to make her reconsider as she looked back to her with surprise. Lai had been holding onto Lin Yu's shawl to keep from being blown away, but stepped up to speak with his late wife. "It's good to have you back, May," Lai offered. "Yes, and now that I've got a body that can avenge our daughter, Lin Yu, give me your light," May asked. Lin Yu was taken aback. "You want me to give you my shining resolve?" she asked, deeply upset. Her mother responded by merely holding out her hand. From her pocket, she pulled out a glowing golden orb that shined bright like the morning sun. "But I earned this, with my own strength. I followed our creed." "Lin Yu, with the orb you claimed from that dragon, I'll be able to draw out its full potential and use it to destroy your sister's killer," May explained. "But I can already defeat him," she declared in frustration. But instead of answering her daughter, May moved to snatch it. I was surprised when Lin Yu pulled it out of her diminutive mother's reach. Her father tugged on her sleeve and said, "Lin Yu, do not disobey your mother. We've been working to bring her back from the dead for ages. You will not stand in the way of our plan." "And how exactly did Towdy fit into your plan?" I asked. All eyes snapped to me. "A lucky bonus. And just who are you?" May asked in reply. "You don't need to know who I am. Do you have any idea how many people have died horrible deaths to make your plan come true?" I asked. "Death does not exist anymore, boy," Lai responded. "Well, not quite," May replied, taking everyone's attention. "What?" he replied with shock. "Through absorbing Yang Wen, I've gained his power and his place in the divine order." "What does that mean?" I asked, as most of the rest of us puzzled about it. I was surprised when Zhao spoke up beside me. "It means she's the new god of death." "That's right. Now, Lin Yu, hand over the light," May replied. "But Lin Yu hesitated, but Lai yanked on her sleeve and grabbed at the orb. She raised her arm back up to keep it out of her tiny parent's reach. "That's enough," Liu said as he walked over. Lin Yu looked relieved to see her brother coming and started saying "Thank you, Liu," but was very surprised when he grabbed her by the arm. He simply told her to hand it over, as he started pushing her arm lower so their parents could reach it. Lin Yu looked at me for only a moment, but then she yanked her arm from her brother and started stepping back from her family. May flexed a hand and claws of pure purple energy surrounded her fingers as she leaped up and slashed Lin Yu across the face. Moving fast, May snatched the ball of light from the ground and immediately stuffed it into her mouth. She retained her black eyes, but white irises arose from the emptiness as her entire body started to glow bright purple. The ground started to shake and a mighty wind blew out from May in all directions, shoving me back a couple meters as I grabbed onto Zhao to keep him from being blown away. The new goddess's light enveloped her as she started to grow, getting taller by the moment as the entire world trembled under her now unyielding might. I still couldn't sense Qi completely, but I could feel her energy radiating off of her like heat, an incredible and insurmountable dread burning across my skin like hurricane winds. As our mother continued to grow, Lin Yu got to her feet and moved like a flash as she snatched the keyring from her brother and surprised us all by tossing it to Ren. "You there, monkey girl! Free your father if you want to live through this," she said as Ren caught their keys by the ring. "Lin Yu, how dare you?" Liu asked. "It's all right, Liu. Your mother will finally avenge your older sister. Unlike you, Lin Yu, you're a failure and a disgrace to my family. How dare you betray us?" Lai spat at his youngest child. Lin Yu scowled at her father and flourished her blade. "You betrayed our entire country in the name of revenge, and now you've betrayed me by choosing to believe in her stolen power over the strength I struggled to earn. Don't you lecture me about betrayal," Lin Yu growled furiously. "So this is really what the truth meant," Liu said quietly to himself. "Tell me the truth already," I jumped in, but Lai pointed up to his son's face. "You will keep your mouth closed. There's a reason I had your lips sewn shut." "You did what?" Lin Yu asked of her father as Liu shrunk from them both. May was still growing and was now the size of a 2-story building, and Ren was desperately putting keys into locks to try and find the right combination of key and jar. but I was surprised when Zhao tugged on my sleeve. I lost track of the others arguing as he told me, "The truth is, loyalty is only as deep as authority in their family." I was a bit struck by what he said as I struggled to understand it. He gave me a moment, but after seeing that I was unclear, he added, "Their bond is only held together by fear and tradition. Truth is, deep down, they can't stand each other." I wonder what happened to make their family like that, he asked himself. I think I have an idea, but I have just one more question. "Do those eyes of yours tell you what their plan is?" I asked desperately. "Well, I kind of feel like it can't possibly be true, but now that you mention it, ever since that demon showed up, my eyes keep showing me visions of her eating the sun," Zhao said. I gulped so hard I nearly choked. "Okay, great. No clue what I'm going to do about that. Things are looking dangerous here. You should make some distance and find cover," I advised. Zhao seemed surprised but nodded just the same. I found myself lucky the Mingsong family was still bickering amongst themselves, but I was starting to get worried about the incredible size of Mei Mingsong's still growing body. She was growing so large her head was pushing through the clouds, and she sprouted massive wings that were made entirely of burning black energy. The sky itself trembled as she hovered above the ground and drifted into the air. It seemed like everyone stopped as Ren said, "Aha!" and finally found a key that fit into a lock and turned it. She yanked the chain off the jar and opened it, and immediately the scroll flew from the jar before unfurling itself and releasing Horseface. He was a literal man with a horse face. Not a horse head, only his face was like a horse's. He was wearing a brown loincloth and carrying a lance, but nothing else. He looked like he was about to address the Mingsong family, but Ren got his attention, managed to explain the situation in a sentence or two, and immediately got to work on setting free Oxhead and Sun. I had returned my attention to the Mingsongs as Lai cocked a crossbow bolt, and Liu started to push past Lin Yu in an attempt to stop them. I knew this was where I was needed and got between them, taking an aggressive stance. Liu reached into his pocket and pulled out his dark orb. I even entirely turned away, but it seemed just having its darkened light shine upon you was enough to activate its effect, pulling my senses away from me one after another like before. I couldn't see or hear, but my sense of smell drifted off and my fingertips only felt slightly numb. But standing there with my back to my enemy, trying to protect Ren and desperately hoping to come up with a plan, suddenly I could feel it. And when I say I could feel it, I mean in every way. It was like I could see and smell and taste and hear the flow of the universe. I could feel Liu walking up behind me with his massive glaive raised. I turned back just in time to block his blow with my sword. I couldn't hear or see his gasp of surprise, but I could feel the shift in his emotions, and more so when I uppercut him so hard in the jaw that he flew several meters into the air. I leaped after him and delivered a powerful kick that sent him barreling through the sky into the city. As I landed, it seemed as though he reached a distant limit for his item, and I was suddenly sent into a slight state of shock by all my senses immediately returning to me at once. I stayed focused, and without even opening my eyes, I deflected the bolt Lai fired at me. I could still feel it. The emotion, the flow, the presence and energy. The chi of the entire battlefield was clear as day to me, and it has been ever since. I opened my eyes just in time to see the light surrounding Mei's incredibly massive body burst away from her, and her glowing seemed to stop along with it. Her foot alone was the size of the plateau, or maybe the entire city of Ordos, but fighting someone that big seemed downright impossible. She started to laugh a wicked, vicious chuckle as she started turning toward the east. My eyes darted for the moon, and I shuddered as I noticed it was now only barely above the horizon. The sun would be rising soon, and Mei would be even closer to it. I heard the click of a key in a lock and a joyful whinny before I felt another jar open and scroll reveal itself, but this one was Oxhead. He looked quite a lot like Horseface, only he carried a pike and a shield. Ren and Horseface quickly enlisted Oxhead to help them in finding the last key as Lai pointed to us and shouted, "Stop them!" Lin Yu hesitated a moment as I flourished my blade and took up a defensive stance, but I was surprised when Liu actually dashed up from wherever I'd kicked him to. Right, I forgot how fast he was, I complained. Liu charged me and I blocked and engaged him, but now that I could feel the flow of his emotions and chi clearly, it was like playing cards with someone who was always showing you what they had. I found myself fighting him absent-mindedly as I listened to Lai and Lin Yu. "So, you really have chosen these interlopers over us? Your own flesh and blood?" Lai asked, pointing his crossbow to Lin Yu. "You've spilled more of our blood than they ever could," Lin Yu spat back. But I was surprised when Lai grabbed a whip from his belt and lashed it at his daughter, hitting her right in the mouth. Lin Yu didn't even react beyond scowling at her father, her lip reddened slightly by the lashing leather. He reared back and lashed her again, but this time she snatched the whip in midair. You disgust me, but you're still my father. I refuse to harm you. But I won't let you hurt me any more, Lin Yu asserted. Lai didn't seem to know what to say as he yanked on his whip, but after a moment or two Lin Yu released it, making him smack himself right in the face with it. Lai reared back and snapped it at her again, but Lin Yu slashed it in half with a disapproving stroke of her blade. Liu had been going at me strongly, but he was starting to run short of breath, so he flashed me with that item again. My senses left me again, but it was a useless endeavor. All I did about it was chuckle to myself. Liu roared as he charged me, but he was being so aggressive that his feet were exposed as he ran, and he fell for a simple trip. The bulky man flopped onto his chest and skidded through the dirt behind me. He pushed himself to his feet and seemed to think going for Ren and the others was a good idea, but he learned how bad an idea it was when I ran up and kneed him in the stomach before breaking his shoulder and pulling on it with my free hand, and slamming through his upper arm with my elbow. That left him pretty strongly stunned, so I walked up to his battered body, reached into his pocket, and pulled out that black orb before dropping it on the ground and crushing it with my foot. My senses returned to me again as I did so, but Liu grunted through the agony of his broken shoulder. You bastard! How dare you break my family treasure? My father gave that to me! But I just told him, you'll get over it, and left him there as I started heading back toward Ren and the others. Mei was starting to drift east across the landscape, and Lin Yu was reluctantly turning toward us, so I got between her and them. But I was surprised that Liu was already getting up so quickly. Our prayers were answered when I heard the click of a key in a lock behind me. Ren threw off the chain and unleashed the scroll of the final pot, loosing her father onto the battlefield. Chapter 12. Like Lightning and Darkness. Sun seemed beyond shocked to be let free as he looked around wildly, trying to take in his surroundings. His pants were torn up in a few places and he looked frazzled, but he quickly regained his composure. Dad, thank God you're okay, Ren said with a big hug. Sun was barely able to respond as his red eyes looked up at the massive deity headed toward the east. He peeled her from his body and said, Ren, you've got to get back, as he pushed her behind him. I hope you're ready to die, Wukong, Lai shouted as he lashed his ruined whip toward Lin Yu. It didn't touch her and she stood still as stone, her eyes looking down at her feet. Sun, that creature wants to devour the light of the sun. We've got to find a way to stop it, I called, pointing up to the massive goddess. Devour the... You've got to be kidding me, Sun said, looking flustered already. I was surprised when Oxhead and Horseface ran up and joined us on the front line. We'll help this kid take down the Mingsongs. You've got to try and hold her off until we can think of a way to separate Yang Wen from that monster, Oxhead said. Horseface nodded in agreement as Ren stepped up. I'll help too, she agreed. Sun was still overwhelmed by the suddenness of all this, but I was surprised to see him close his eyes and smile to himself. When he opened his eyes back up, they were glowing bright white, and he said, All right then, before his aura turned white too, and he leaped up into the sky, riding on yellow clouds as he engaged Mei Mingsong. Can you take Lin Yu, or do you want help? Ren asked. You capture Lai. The other two should be able to handle Liu while his shoulder is all busted up, I instructed, and the others followed my orders without hesitation. The two opposing groups spread out just enough to make 3 even battles, leaving me alone, standing face to face with Lin Yu, the last blade of Mingsong. She was standing there with her eyes still on her feet, so I said, It doesn't have to be this way, you know. I don't want to see you die here if you still have good to put into the world. Lin Yu seemed to take offense to my offer and scowled at me. You and I have never had families that loved us. What good could we possibly put into the world, she demanded. All I've done these past several years is slaughter and kill in the name of revenge. And where has it gotten me? Used and tossed aside like all the rest. All my family does is destroy things in the name of a false image of immortality we'll never achieve. My entire life has been a waste and a lie. Fine, maybe that's true, I replied, and she seemed mystified by my calmness as I responded. But that doesn't mean the rest of your life has to be. You can choose to make that change. Right here, right now. Your strength could make the difference in this fight. Lin Yu heard what I said, but her scowl turned to a vicious glare as she took a tight grip on her blade and pointed it to the sky to ready herself. Then let's see which is stronger, my will or yours. I couldn't help but smile to myself as I said, Now you're speaking my language. Lin Yu and I charged each other as fast as we could, and she slashed violently at me 3 times, but I deflected her blows before retaliating with a brutal spinning slash that cut deep into her left arm. But like the warrior she was, Lin Yu didn't even flinch as she slammed down on my shoulder with the butt of her sword, knocking me to the ground. I didn't stay down long and spun into a sweep kick, but she leaped right over me as she moved to drive her blade down into my chest. I found this was familiar and moved on instinct, firing a bolt of lightning from my fingertips and making her lean way back just in time to avoid getting struck. I backflipped to my feet and she moved in for a quick slash, but I blocked it and punched her right in the mouth, making her stumble backward a few steps. You've improved quite a lot in the short time I've known you, Lin Yu said with intrigue as she wiped blood from her lips. I'm a quick study, and a power-up never hurts either, I smugly replied. Let's hope it's enough, she said before she moved quickly to my right. She was using her top speed now, and if I hadn't unlocked my aura transformation, I probably wouldn't have been able to see her. But that didn't matter anymore. Now that I could sense her chi, she would never catch me off guard again. She approached from behind and went for a violent slash at my right shoulder, so I moved to retaliate, but she hadn't expected it to be a feint. I feinted at her and she moved to block, leaving her wide open for me to give her a dirty slash across the chest and send her sprawling into the dirt. I looked up at Sun to see him holding back Mei, seeming like a fly dueling a giant from the distance. Lin Yu pushed herself to her feet, but was bleeding badly as she held a hand to her chest. After only a few moments, she seemed relieved as the wound closed up, but she definitely lost a lot of blood. Wildly, she took up an aggressive stance with anger in her eyes. I realized that the only way this would end quickly would be if I managed to wound her pride instead of her body, so instead of taking up a defensive stance, I lowered my guard. She looked even more enraged by this, and I couldn't help but smile to myself. She dashed straight at me and threw her whole body into the most powerful slash she could muster, but I ducked it. She took another wild strike at me, and I sidestepped it, but she adjusted her grip and thrust at me just as I stepped out of the way, so I was left with only one option. I retaliated with a vicious slash of my own and knocked her blade from her hands, sending it spinning through the dirt behind her. I thought she was going to dash for it, but instead she just stood there, looking deeply into my eyes. We stared at each other a few moments before her expression softened, and she smiled at me. All right, you win. I'll help you return things to the natural order, Lin Yu agreed, seeming to have found what she was searching for in my gaze. I nodded to her. All right then, let's move quickly, I said, turning to get a grasp of the other battles. Oxhead and Horseface had nearly subdued Liu, and Ren had captured Lai and broken his crossbow, but she seemed to be looking for a way to restrain him. I felt Lin Yu pick up her blade before she walked up behind me and put her hand on my shoulder. The tip of her blade touched my back, right about where my heart would be. Go ahead, I said. Cement your family's legacy as a bunch of backstabbers. Why choose to be better when you could just follow the example that's been set, right? I'm sure on some level that absolves you of guilt in your mind, but we'll both always know the truth. I waited a moment to see how she would respond, but I was surprised to hear the blade slip from her hand and clatter to the ground. I looked back just in time to see Lin Yu fall to her knees and slam her fist into the dirt. I could feel my words were causing her to struggle with herself. She just needed one more push. Pick yourself up, last blade of Mingsong. It's time to clean up your family's mess and start over, don't you think? I asked. Lin Yu's eyes opened wide and she breathed out a growling sigh as she grabbed her blade and forced herself back to her fate. Damon of Athens, are you always this insufferable? She asked, smiling angrily to herself. According to my friends? Yeah, usually, I said with a smirk. Then we'd best not keep them waiting for you, she said smugly. Yeah, the only problem is I have no idea how to stop this, I said, looking up and watching Sun attempt to engage Mei. Unfortunately, it seemed that her body was almost entirely incapable of being touched. Sun's blows passed right through her, but I counted us lucky that she was too distracted with trying to catch him to notice the rising sun to the east. Me either, but we have to try, Lin Yu said, dashing ahead and leaping up to make a vicious slash at her mother's feet, but the giant goddess didn't even seem to notice. Oxhead and Horseface weren't far behind in joining the battle, but being that they couldn't jump as high as Lin Yu, they were basically even more useless than she was proving to be. I found myself biting the tip of my thumb as I desperately tried to puzzle out a way to even damage her. Damon, do you have any rope? Ren asked, trying to keep Lai from struggling out of her hold on him. I didn't bother responding because I didn't have any. Ren waited a few moments before saying, Hello, Damon, I could use your help over here. I walked over silently, trying not to lose my train of thought. Without hesitating, I beheaded General Lai before also severing his arms and legs from his torso, just to ensure he wouldn't be getting back up. Ren was horrified and asked, What the hell are you doing? Making sure a backstabber isn't standing behind us, I explained. Ren seemed surprised, but only scowled at me, seeming as though she disapproved of my methods. Just then, the sun finally peeked over the horizon, making May shield her eyes before hissing violently at the shining jewel of our solar system. She seemed to forget all about Sun Wukong and the others as she started drifting toward the east, rising higher as she went.
Damn it, we're running out of time,
Sun said furiously. Sun landed atop a cloud and Lin Yu grabbed the others before leaping up to join him. Lin Yu, Oxhead, Horseface, and Sun Wukong all lined up as a last line of defense between May and the sun atop a cloud, but she hardly even seemed to notice them. May kept creeping closer as she drifted eastward, but then she raised a hand, seemingly trying to keep the sun out of her eyes. And then it hit me. Towdy had been immune to basically every attack as well, but there was one I knew for sure was able to damage it. I leaped up and joined Sun and the others as I made red lightning electrify my blade. Desperation the only thing letting me hold on to any hope. I knew the only way to find out if this would work was to test it, so I extended 2 fingers and fired a massive bolt of red lightning at May. Everyone was shocked when it flew right through her chest but electrified her body, making her cry out in agony. "That's it! We have to use lightning," I said, as May backed down, her attention shifting to us. "Lightning?" Lin Yu asked, seeming like the idea had struck a chord with her. She looked even more surprised when I electrified her weapon, and the weapons of Oxhead and Horseface as well. Towdy was a creature of darkness, and it looks like by absorbing him, she absorbed his weakness as well, I explained. Sun smacked his fists together with a crackle of electricity as an excited "ha ha ha" that came from deep in his chest.
Not bad, kid.
"Not bad at all," he praised. But then he leaped into battle and punched May with an electrified fist so hard her head spun around before she fell backward, crashing down into the city below. Sun caught himself on a yellow cloud before he scratched the back of his head and said, "Whoops." "Maybe hitting her weakness isn't enough. We have to find a way to separate them," Ren called up from the ground. I put a hand to my chin, not sure what I should do next, but I was surprised when Sun snapped his fingers with excitement.
"I've got an idea.
"Can you guys distract her for a few minutes?" he asked, looking back to us. I nodded before the others could, and he gave us a strong thumbs up before flying up into the sky. "I hope it's a good idea," Lin Yu said as she took up an aggressive stance. "I guess we'll find out," I replied as I took an offensive stance too. Lin Yu smiled at me, and together we watched her mother get up. Crushed buildings mangled beneath her as she rose back into the sky. I fired another powerful bolt, but we were all surprised when she dodged it. May came rushing at us, but before Lin Yu or I could attack, Oxhead and Horseface leaped right off a cloud and plunged their electrified weapons into her body, making her scream in anguish and rage. She lashed out and slashed them with razor-like energy surrounding her hands, but Lin Yu and I barely had time to dodge as she followed up with another wild attack. Lin Yu leaped in and slashed her brutally across the face. But it seemed May was ready and retaliated, smashing her daughter's bones as she sent her plummeting toward the ground. But I didn't have any time to worry about her. May moved to attack me as well, ripping the clouds apart with her massive energy claws as I leaped from one cloud to the next to avoid her. After a few moments I was left with nowhere to go, but as I jumped to safety I remembered Jacob at the tournament, using fire to fly. I remembered correcting my fall with a burst of flame, but that wouldn't do what I wanted it to. So instead, I jumped and fired a massive bolt of lightning away from her, causing it to propel me forward toward May at ridiculous speed. I turned and spun into a vicious blow that would have killed anyone else, but despite my sword passing through her neck completely and her scream of great pain, her head remained attached to her body. I started falling to the ground, not sure how much more I could do. I was exhausted, but I knew I needed to keep fighting. I managed to land on my feet and jumped up to take a vicious slash at May's ankle. I hit her, but I was surprised when she used her other hoofed foot and tried to stomp on me. I needed to drop my sword to catch her foot, because Lin Yu, Oxhead, Horseface, and Ren were all close by. It took every drop of strength I had to keep her from crushing us, and Ren tried to help too, but it was no use. Just when my arms were about to give out, I was surprised when May's massive weight shifted and her foot lifted off of us. I looked up to see Sun holding a golden gourd bottle. He yanked the top off and poured a golden liquid down May's throat, but she pulled away from him and retched as she grabbed at her windpipe. Even as she started to scream, I could feel it was over. Just the tiny amount Sun had gotten into her mouth was already causing her to shrink. Sun joined Ren and I on the battlefield as Lin Yu pushed herself to her feet using her blade, her body broken and wounded. Her right arm in particular was hanging limp and bleeding badly. We all watched as May continued to shrink, but I was surprised when she continued shrinking past her original size. And when she was about the size of a child's doll, her whole body began to glow. Just then she burst with light, and from the brightness came Yang Wen, now not much larger than a regular man, Touty, and everyone was surprised to meet Mei Mingsong, now in a human form. Her body was old and fragile, and she seemed to be struggling just to breathe. "You think this is over?" I heard Lai say, his bleeding corpse still laying in the dirt not far away. "We're not done yet. You false gods look down on my family. We'll never stop hunting you." "Yes, we will," Lin Yu said. "I'm done playing as a pawn for your sick ambitions. It's time for you to accept your death and give up on these dreams of an immortality you'll never deserve." May turned and opened her mouth to start speaking, but all that came from her throat was sand. We all watched in horror as May slowly disintegrated, turning to dust before our very eyes. "Our immortality is true. It will never end. Don't you see? Even now, as a bleeding head, I persist," Lai insisted. I was surprised when Yang Wen was the first to reply, saying, "Yeah, about that," and waving a hand. Bid by its master, a small, thin book flew from Lai's robes and into his hand. Yang Wen opened up the book and flipped to the page where there were many scratched-out names, written in writing so tiny I could barely see it. Yang Wen snapped his fingers and a feathered quill appeared, which he then used to write in several names. After rewriting their names into the Book of Souls, Yang Wen conjured a stamp and pressed it to Lai and Mei Mingsong's names. Lai went quiet, and Mei collapsed into a pile of sand, never to utter another word in the realm of the living. All that remained in the pile was a burning black soul with a hint of deep blue in the center. Touty stepped up and crunched on her soul with sheer delight before doing the same to her husband's dark gray spirit.
"Well, now that that's settled, it's about time to decide what to do about you,"
Yang Wen said, looking to Lin Yu. "But what about Touty?" I asked, noticing he seemed docile since being returned to his original form.
"He'll be returning to the underworld with me. He's really a harmless creature, but that stomach of his is nearly bottomless. I swear, I'd bet the only reason he came out in the first place was his gluttonous hunger for souls," he explained.
"I still don't even understand why there's a creature like him kept in the underworld in the first place," Ren remarked, seeming shaken by the events of the past few days.
"Du is called a prison, but it's honestly closer to a rehabilitation center of sorts," Yang Wen explained. "If a soul serves its punishment in the afterlife, we let them move on into heaven. But if they refuse to repent, we serve the truly evil souls to old Touty to keep them from becoming demons in the life beyond."
"Wait, so he's like a garbage bin, but for evil?" Ren asked, making Touty scale at her.
"That's crude, but not inaccurate," Yang Wen agreed.
Touty stomped a hoof and whinnied, but no one really seemed to pay much attention now that he wasn't a threat.
"So that just leaves the question, what do we do with you?"
Sun asked very seriously as he looked to Lin Yu. She glared at him a moment before looking away. "I don't expect you to let me walk away. Do what you have to do," she said. Sun looked conflicted. "As long as you agree not to cause any more problems, we'll let you go," I said, surprising them all.
"Well, that and you renounce your oath of revenge against my family," Sun added.
Lin Yu had a faraway look in her eyes as she looked to the ground, but then she looked back and stared at her brother a few moments. I was surprised when she stepped up to me, sheathed her blade, pulled it and its scabbard from her sword belt, and handed them to me. I was once the last blade of Mingsong, but no longer. I swear on what little honor I have left, I'll never allow another member of my family to walk the path I was forced onto, so long as I live, she promised. Sun nodded strongly and said,
"Well, that's good enough for me. These people are going to be cleaning up this mess for quite a while, so if I were you, I'd gather up my brother and move on."
"But this is the only home I've ever known," Lin Yu said dejectedly, looking to the scorched rubble that was once her family estate. "Then stay, and help them rebuild. I'm sure this town could use a strong pair of hands like yours right now," I told her, putting my new blade on my sword belt. Ren and the others nodded, seeming to think it was a good idea. Sun clapped the dirt from his hands and chuckled.
"Well, I'm glad this all wrapped up nicely. Yang Wen, will you be able to return Touty to your realm all right, or could you use an extra pair of hands?" he asked. "I think I'll be all right. Thank you, son. I'll be sure to tell the Jade Emperor that we couldn't have done it without you,"
Yang Wen said pleasantly. "By the way, What was that stuff? Ren asked, pointing to the golden gourd on Sun's hip. It's a type of wine from heaven, said to remove impurities. I wasn't totally sure if it would split Yang Wen from the others, but I'm glad I tried it at least. Sun chuckled. I wonder if the impurity was Mei Mingsong's soul, Oxhead wondered aloud, but we never got an answer to his question. I actually found myself feeling a bit wistful at everyone getting their happy ending, so I turned and watched the rising sun as everyone got organized. But then everyone paused when we heard a voice not far away call out, "Is it safe to come out now?" I couldn't help but smile as Zhao came out of his hiding spot, the puppy cradled safely in his arms. I felt relief for the first time in ages, knowing that everyone was all right. Better yet, I was finally able to relax a bit now that I'd managed to recruit the help of the Chinese pantheon. Other than that, we returned the puppy and Liu gave back Zhao Zai eventually. Unfortunately, those who were killed or had their souls eaten were gone for good, and there was nothing we could do for them. I spoke with the Jade Emperor one more time, confirming that they would help us when the time came. However, I actually got a bit of a bonus as well when he ordered Sun and Ren to come along with me on my journey to help recruit the Japanese pantheon. We grew quite close over our travels and had a good few adventures together, but none really worth telling when compared to this one. More often than not, it was either Sun solving our problem on his own, or him forcing me to solve them without him. Either way, that's the story of how I saved the world from having our sun eaten, keeping our light shining through the darkness. Alright guys, that's it. That's all I got for you. That was Godly Legacies, Lightning and Darkness. If you liked this video, please subscribe. If you enjoyed the book, please buy it on Amazon, but there's no pressure. The reason I put these audiobooks out for free is so people who can't afford them can simply enjoy them. I'm the kind of person who I want to actually put my art out there for free, and I would much rather do it that way than have to make people pay for it. But you know how it is. If you want a physical copy, you can buy one. If you want the ebook, or you want to download the audiobook and listen to it, you're welcome to do that as well. Either way, thank you so very, very much for joining me on this adventure. I love this book, actually. When I was writing it, I wasn't super happy with it, but now that I've read it again a year later, man, I really like how this story turned out, and I know I'm patting myself on the back when I say that, but gosh, I just enjoy this story right out. Like, it's got everything I like about my series, and it's all wrapped up super nicely. But anyway, yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or if you want to talk about the series, always feel free. You can send me an email at kaibontherenegade@gmail.com if you have feedback or suggestions for the series. But anyway, guys, I'm just an indie author, so any way you can support me would be extremely helpful. And thank you one last time so much for watching and listening. I know this was a bit of a journey for sure, but I really, really appreciate everyone who actually listened to it all the way through. Or even if you just started it, honestly, that's still pretty cool. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye. She also had a long cloak-like shawl in a checkerboard pattern of white-blue. I keep saying white-blue. She also had a long cloak-like shawl with a white. Damn it. She also had a long cloak-like shawl with a checkerboard. She also had a long cloak-like shawl with a checkerboard pattern of light blue and white. I turned back to face our enemies as I heard a set of footsteps. It crashed through the tree canopy, and it crashed through the tree canopy and was supposed to electrify us both. So close. It crashed through the tree can. Yeah, like a bunk of bookies. Monk's hood, I said gently. Monk's hood, I said gently. And a black beard so narrow it could be confused for a needle. Because we haven't seen even one spirit. That's wrong. Hi, baby. Daddy's working right now. No, don't touch. That's not a toy. Son, Red said you know something. Son, Red said you know... Red. Son, I keep saying Red. Son, Ren said you knew about sensing energy and... Son, Red... I wasn't going to take that lying down, so I got up. Play on words. I took a moment to check my chest and found it bloody, but the wound had already closed up completely. Damn it. That's what I get. Without warning, the scroll started... This is the wrong page. As I drifted through the air, I noticed the barrier crumbling around me and drifting into the air like... As I drifted through the... Oh, man. Drifting through the air twice in a row. Fuck. I apparently really need to invest in a thesaurus. As I drifted through the air, I noticed the barrier crumbling around me and drifting into the air like dust in the breeze. As I flew through the air, I noticed the barrier crumbling around me and drifting into the air. At first, I thought Zhao was unright. Unright? At first, I thought we were all a bit taken aback when General Lai called out, "Liu, get the jar and bring it here." Ren and Liu were born. So fucking redundant. I need to proofread this stuff better. Like, how could I, this one especially is so fucking glaring. We were all a bit taken aback. Ren and Liu were taken aback. It's a sentence away. It shouldn't be that fucking complex. Finally, oh, hang on. That's the wrong voice. We stared at each other for a few moments before her expression softened, didn't she? We stared at each other for a few moments before her expression softened. I keep saying softened. It's softened. Damn it, we're running out of time. That's awful. Bid by its master, a small thin book. Bid by its master, a small thin book flew from. Bid by its master, a small thin book flew from. Oh, that was an ordeal, but it was good. It was worth it.